I always loved taking my little 8-year-old daughter Chrissy trick-or-treating ever since she was old enough to walk. I would dress her up as a ballerina or a princess or whatever cute character would draw the most smiles and, "Oh, aren't you adorable," comments. If I had known how things were going to end, I never would have taken her trick-or-treating in her entire life. It started in late September when I hadn't picked out an outfit for Chrissy yet. We were hitting the end of season yard sales and my neighbor had told me that the one that we were going to had lots of Halloween costumes. When we got there, I discovered that she wasn't kidding. The one side of her garage was nothing but costumes hanging on racks. I wondered why there were so many when I checked out the prices. Mystery solved. Our prices were only a few dollars less than in the department store. Why do people do that? Assume that there's stuff that's been sitting around in their attic or garages worth so much. I still made a polite show of looking through the outfits in hopes that I would stumble across something cute and cheap. Although with the rest of the prices being so high, anything cheap would be immediately suspect. As I was searching in vain, Chrissy came to me holding a mask. "Look, Mommy," she said, "I can go as a witch this year." I looked at the mask of an old woman's grotesque face. "Is that really what you want to go as?" I said. "Why not a princess?" "Oh, Mom, I go as a princess every year." "How about a unicorn?" "I just really want to go as a witch this year." I sighed, holding the unicorn outfit in my hand and looking into her pleading eyes. "Please?" "All right," I said, putting the unicorn back and digging out the rest of the witch outfit. In the end, it saved me $10. I guess the witch wasn't selling well. I wish with everything in me that I could return that $10 and undo everything that happened. We walked up to the old woman, Mrs. Henderson, who was selling the clothes and paid for the outfit. It struck me as we were walking out how much her face reminded me of the mask. We were barely in the door at home until Chrissy ran off with the outfit to try it on. I carried in the rest of my yard sale finds and set them down to find places for them later. I turned around and my heart skipped a beat as a tiny witch stood staring at me. "Oh, Chrissy," I said, "you nearly scared the life out of me." "I'm sorry, Mommy," she said, but it wasn't Chrissy's voice that came out. It sounded high-pitched and garbled. "I see that mask has a little bonus to it," I said. "That's not all," she said in her modified, high-pitched garble. "Looking through it is really cool, too." It was a little disturbing hearing that voice, but knowing it was my daughter saying the words. If she were older, I was sure she would use this to scare me several times before Halloween came around. "Let me see it," I said. She had a little difficulty taking the mask off, but once she did, I put it on and looked through the red lenses that were sewn in. It made the world look a lot different. Not just the color, but there seemed to be an aura around objects. I shrugged it off and lunged at Chrissy, saying, "Boo!" She jumped and squealed as I chased her around the table. "I'll get you, my pretty," I said as I chased her into the living room. She dove onto the couch and tried to hide behind some pillows. I slowly circled the couch, closing in for the kill when I saw something dart away out of the corner of my eye. I didn't think that she could move that fast, but I pursued the new target down the hallway toward the bedrooms. "Mommy, where are you going?" I heard Chrissy say behind me. I pulled off the mask and she was standing in the living room by the couch watching me. I glanced back at the hallway and shrugged it off. Must have been my imagination. I went back into the living room and gave her the mask. "Are you sure you'll be able to see in that thing on a dark Halloween night?" I said. "I'll be okay, Mommy," she said. "There are plenty of streetlights, and besides, you'll be there with me." "Oh yes," I said. "I almost forgot." She smiled and hugged me and then grabbed the mask and skipped away happily. Over the next week, she took the time to scare me with it on a daily basis. It got to the point where I had to threaten to take it away from her. I still caught her wearing it quite often, and with Halloween quickly approaching, I could barely keep the thing off her head. Finally, the big night came. Chrissy was bouncing off the walls with excitement. She was dressed in her costume and ready to go an hour before trick-or-treating even started. All through the day, I had been keeping an eye on the storm clouds that were brewing, threatening to put a damper on our fun. But until the evening rolled around, they had blown off and left a nice evening that wasn't too warm or too cool. We left the house, making sure to leave our porch light off so as to not tease any trick-or-treaters with the false pretense of candy at our house. We started down the dark street, lit by the occasional streetlight. At first, Chrissy was pulling on me like a dog straining against a leash to get to the first house. But as we walked, she drew closer to me. The first house was everything you would expect. The nice woman who answered the door had asked, "And what are you supposed to be?" "I'm a witch," was Chrissy's enthusiastic response, but being said through whatever filter was in the mask made the woman jump. "Oh my, that's quite a costume," she said. She politely held out the bowl for Chrissy to choose 2 candies from, and then disappeared back into her house. We hadn't seen but a few other trick-or-treaters until we turned onto the main street, and they seemed to be everywhere, dodging back and forth across the street. They wore every kind of costume that you could think of, from the classic ghost to cartoon characters to zombies to princesses. I looked wistfully at the princesses when the little witch holding my hand suddenly pulled against me. "What's wrong, sweetie?" I said as she huddled close to me. "I'm scared, Mommy," she said in that high-pitched, screechy voice the mask somehow produced. "Of what, baby?" "The monsters." I looked and there was a zombie, Frankenstein, and a werewolf walking together toward us up the street. "Oh baby, they're just costumes," I said, "just like every other year." "Are you sure?" she said, her death grip on my hand loosening just a bit. "Of course, honey," I said. "Everybody's dressed up to have fun just like you. Don't you think some other little girl would look at you and be scared of the witch?" Her grip loosened to normal. "Yeah, I guess so." We started down the street, following along with a crowd of superheroes and other colorful characters. The more houses we went to, the more she seemed to relax and enjoy herself. There was still a few times when she would walk so close to me that she almost tripped me, mostly when there were large groups coming towards us. Frankly, I was surprised that she could see much of anything out of that mask. There were a few spots where these streetlights were farther apart and I struggled to see the sidewalk. On the whole, though, the evening had been going well. Her bag was filling with candy and everybody seemed to like her outfit. We even came to Mrs. Henderson's house, the woman who had sold it to us. When we stood at the end of her walkway, Chrissy hesitated. "Are you sure the monsters are just pretend?" she said, looking up at me with that disturbing mask. "Oh, of course, sweetie, just go on up to the door." A group was just leaving as Chrissy walked up. "Ah, I see one of my costumes has come home," Mrs. Henderson said, dressed as a witch herself and sounding much like the voice that the mask made. "Trick or treat," Chrissy said. She stared at her for a moment as Chrissy seemed to stare at nothing on the porch beside the woman. She glanced over at the empty porch and leaned down to whisper something in Chrissy's ear while she held out the candy bowl. Chrissy nodded her head as she grabbed 2 pieces of candy and darted away from the woman. I smiled and we turned toward the next house. As soon as we were out of sight, I pulled her aside. "What did that woman say to you, Chrissy?" I said. For a long moment, the tiny witch eyes stared at me silently. She asked me if I liked the mask," she said. I looked into those red plastic lenses, completely unable to tell if what she said was the truth. I paused and took a deep breath. "I think maybe we've had enough trick-or-treating for the night," I said. "I think so too," she said, much to my surprise. "Can we go home now?" I looked at her half-full bag of candy that didn't have nearly as much in it as other Halloweens, but she had been acting odd the whole time. "Sure, sweetie," I said, smiling. "Let's head home." We crossed to the other side of the street at Chrissy's urging so that we wouldn't have to go near the woman's house again. Either it was my imagination or we made it home more quickly than I had expected. I was nearly out of breath when we opened the door and Chrissy dove inside, ripping off the mask and costume. She ran to her room and changed into her pajamas and then came back out and gave the costume and mask a wide berth as she went to the couch. "It's not quite bedtime yet. You want to watch something on TV?" I said. No, I'm pretty tired. I think I'm just going to go to bed. Good night." She started toward her bedroom. "Don't you want any of your candy?" She looked from me to the bag of candy sitting on the end table. "I'll have some tomorrow," she said. "What about your costume?" She stared at it, laying on the floor. "I don't want it anymore," she said, and then went to her room and shut the door. I stared at her as she went. I couldn't imagine when she wouldn't dive into her candy. Usually I had to limit her so that she wouldn't go to bed with a sugar high. I stepped over and picked up the costume, sighing at the wasted money, but happy that she enjoyed it for only a little while. I walked over to the trash can and I threw the costume in. As I held the mask, I felt like I had to look through it one more time. I put it over my head and the world was instantly bathed in red. I looked around and for whatever reason, the auras surrounding objects seemed to be brighter. I was about to take it off when I saw something dart off to the side. I ripped the mask off and looked where I had seen the movement, but nothing was there. I tossed the mask in the garbage and did a slow lap around the room, searching for anyone who may have been trying to play a prank on me like a certain little former witch. I smiled as I looked from hiding place to hiding place, knowing that she was trying to sneak up on me and scare me. It was the only thing that made sense. She had passed up candy and her precious costume to throw me off guard, so that she could sneak up on me and give me a Halloween scare. I finished my circle through the room without finding her and then ended by locking the front door. I made my way back to the hall expecting to be surprised at any moment. My biggest surprise was that it never came. I stood in front of Chrissy's door and slowly opened it. Peeking inside, I saw her fast asleep, or doing an excellent job of faking being asleep. I shrugged it off and went to my bedroom. My head hit the pillow and I was soon fast asleep. I awoke in the middle of the night, knowing something was wrong. I sat bolt upright and scanned the room. Beside my bed stood a shadowy figure. My heart froze as I went into full panic mode. Someone was in the house and they were standing beside my bed. I threw myself to the other side of the bed and fumbled for the light. When I turned it on, I saw Chrissy standing there wearing the witch mask. It took a minute to let my heart return to normal before I said anything. "Chrissy, honey, you scared me," I said. She didn't reply. She just stood there as still as a statue. I had to watch her chest rise and fall just to be sure that she was still breathing. "Chrissy, why did you get the mask out of the garbage?" She didn't move. "Chrissy, honey, why don't you take off that mask and go back to bed?" She remained still. I slowly crawled across the bed and stood beside her. My hand hesitantly reached toward her and pulled off the mask. To my surprise, her eyes were closed. It was as if she was still sleeping. "Chrissy," I said, gently rubbing her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open and she looked at me. "Why did you wake me up, Mommy?" she said. "Oh, you were sleepwalking, baby." "I was?" "Yeah, you took the mask out of the garbage and put it on and then walked to my room." "I don't remember that." "Well, that's how sleepwalking works, baby. You usually don't remember." "I'm tired. I'm gonna go back to bed now." I kissed her forehead. "You sleep good now," I said. She walked out of my room, leaving me holding the mask. It stared at me with its empty red eyes and making me feel more than a little uncomfortable. I leaned over and put it in the bottom nightstand drawer and then turned off the light and tried to go back to sleep. But sleep did not come easy. I tossed and turned for hours. Every time I would drift off, a vision of that mask would invade my dreams and I would be startled awake, absolutely certain that somebody had just been in my room. But each time the room was empty. No sleepwalking Chrissy, no stranger hovering over me. When morning came around, I stumbled for the coffee maker to try and get myself moving. Good morning, Mommy," Chrissy said cheerfully, sitting at the kitchen table, watching TV while eating a bowl of cereal. I mumbled something like, "Morning," as I stumbled through making a fresh pot of coffee, mixing it extra strong. "Didn't you sleep good, Mommy?" she said in her cheerful little voice. "No, I didn't. Thanks to a certain little visitor in the middle of the night," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Who?" I looked at her incredulous. Was she serious, or was she playing a game? "You," I said. "You came into my room in the middle of the night, wearing that mask, and you nearly scared me half to death." Her little brow furrowed. "I didn't get out of bed at all last night, Mommy." "Yes, you did, Chrissy," I said. "You dug that witch mask out of the garbage and wore it into my room." "You threw my mask in the garbage." "Yes, I did," I said slowly. "I thought that it scared you so bad you didn't want it anymore." Her eyes became unfocused and she seemed deep in thought. "Maybe I was just tired last night. I didn't want you to get rid of it." "Well, then how did you?" I said as a news flash came over the TV. In local news, a 63-year-old Martha Henderson was found dead this morning. Police are investigating, but it appears that somebody broke into the woman's house late last night and assaulted her. She was pronounced dead this morning on the scene. The cause of death: multiple stab wounds. A picture of the woman flashed up on the screen. "Hey, look, Mommy, it's the lady we bought the mask from," Chrissy said. It hadn't dawned on me until she had pointed it out, but she was right. The lady from the art sale who lived only a short walk away was brutally stabbed to death last night. I thought back to Chrissy standing in my bedroom and shuddered at the fact that some crazed killer could have been hovering over me, or even worse, hovering over Chrissy last night. I shook the thoughts away as I glanced at the clock. "Oh, hurry, honey," I said. "You'll be late for the bus." I went to the door as she gathered her book bag. When I got there, a shock awaited me. "Chrissy, did you unlock the door this morning?" I said. "No, Mommy, why?" "Oh, no reason," I said, smiling and pushing open the door that had not only been unlocked but slightly ajar. We stepped out into the cool November morning air, streetlights still glowing as the sun fought to rise over the horizon. I pulled her jacket tight around her and zipped it up. "You have a great day at school," I said as the bus pulled up. "I will, Mommy," she said with that infectious smile. The bus slowed to a stop and Chrissy waited in line with the other kids to get on and be carried away to school. I waved as it drove away, glancing at the other mothers. Usually there would be some idle chit-chat between some, but today everyone quickly dispersed back to their houses. I told myself it was because of the cold, but I knew that they were all thinking the same thing as me. There's a murderer running loose around our neighborhood. Everybody was getting back inside their houses as quickly as possible and double locking the doors. I stepped through my own door and examined the lock as if it had somehow betrayed us. I locked and unlocked it several times to make sure that it worked, and then once I was satisfied, I closed it and locked it. I changed into my work clothes of a dress shirt and jogging pants, and then I sat down at my laptop. Telecommuting has been both a blessing and a curse. Staying home was great for a while, but soon I began to crave actual face-to-face social interaction. Video meetings on the computer just weren't the same. And after the shocking news this morning, I wasn't feeling very secure at home. I would have felt better around other people. The day seemed to drag on as I found myself often distracted by shooting furtive looks toward the windows, as if I expected somebody to crash through one and murder me at any moment. I found myself coasting through the day, fighting to keep my focus on the job. When the knock came at the door, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I approached it slowly as if it were about to attack me. When I looked out through the peephole, there was no one there. A chill ran down my spine where there was another knock just as I had turned away. I stared at the door knowing that nobody was on the other side and wondered what kind of supernatural dream state that I had fallen into. Was I asleep at my keyboard and having a nightmare? The knock sounded again, but this time there came a voice with it. "Mommy, why's the door locked?" Chrissy said. I stepped back to the peephole and looked out. There stood Chrissy. I unlocked and ripped the door open so fast that she jumped back. "Why weren't you outside waiting for me?" she said with betrayal reflecting in her eyes. I glanced over at the wall clock and sure enough, it was time for her to be home. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. Mommy must have gotten busy and time got away." "But why did you lock the door?" "I just felt like locking it." She looked at me with an odd, knowing look. "Was it about the lady who got killed?" "Maybe," I said, trying to be non-committal. "Do you think whoever did it is still around?" She said as if she had just asked if it was going to rain tomorrow. "Hey, are you hungry?" I said. "Let's get a snack." I spent the rest of the evening helping her with her spelling words and playing games. It was a wonderful time. After supper, we watched her favorite shows and then went to bed. "Good night, Mommy," she said as I tucked her in. "Hey, don't be afraid, everything will be all right." I considered asking her what she meant, but in the end, all I did was smile and say, "I know," while I stroked her hair. If only I had known. I woke in the middle of the night, startled again by Chrissy standing at my bedside. "Oh, Chrissy, you need to stop scaring Mommy like that," I said, looking into the eyes of the mask that she was wearing. "Wait a minute. Chrissy, how did you get that mask back?" She didn't answer for a long moment. "My friends gave it to me." "What friends, honey?" "Oh, the same ones I saw on the street on Halloween. The ones you said were just pretending to be monsters." A chill ran down my spine. "When did you talk to these friends last?" "Tonight, when they gave me the mask back," she said. "They're not very happy that you keep throwing it away." I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "Well, I threw it away because Halloween is over." "Not for them," she said. "They dress in their costumes all the time." "They're monster costumes." She nodded. "And can you see them in their monster costumes?" I said slowly. "Only when I wear the mask." My hand darted out and tried to grab the mask and take it off of her, but she dodged and backed away. I heard a high-pitched cackle come from the mask, remembering how it changed her voice. "They said you might try that," she said. "They told me about a fun game that we can play." She skipped away as I jumped out of bed and followed her. She ran down the hall to her room and darted inside. I peeked around the corner, not sure what I would find. Chrissy was standing on the other side of her bed, looking at me through that horrid mask. "They gave me some fun new toys to play this game with," she said, reaching under her pillow and pulling out 2 butcher knives that looked like mini swords in her little hands that barely wrapped around the handles. My eyes grew wide. "What if I don't want to play this game?" I said. She looked off to the side as if seeing something that I couldn't. "They said that you wouldn't like that at all," she said, lowering her voice, "that it would make them angry." I glanced in the direction she was looking but didn't see anything. Just then, Chrissy jumped up on her bed and dove at me, swinging the knives. I was completely caught off guard. One of the knives caught my forearm and slashed a long gash in it. "Chrissy," I yelled, but she was still coming at me swinging the knives. "Come on, Mommy, play." I dove to the side, feeling the knife slice my forehead, and then ran out of her room and into the kitchen. "You hurt Mommy," I said as I ran. "Oh, don't worry, it's just like in video games. After you die, you respawn." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was something that mask was doing to her, and I had to get it off her any way that I could. Once in the kitchen, I glanced around for anything that I could use. My eyes fell briefly on the knife block that still held several steak knives. The thought was fleeting and I quickly dismissed it. I was fighting the mask, not my daughter. I had to make sure that I didn't hurt her. Quickly searching, I found a dish towel and grabbed it just in the nick of time as Chrissy came charging into the kitchen. She swung at me with one of the knives and I was able to block it with the towel, but it had cut partway through. I quickly wrapped the remaining towel around the knife and pulled it out of her grip. She stumbled and fell to the floor. I was on top of her in an instant. She kicked and flailed, swinging the remaining knife at me, just missing my face by inches. I blocked the knife with my already belling arm and used the other arm to rip it out of her grasp. It wasn't as easy as it should have been. She had some supernatural strength, but eventually I was able to pull it free. I reached for the mask when suddenly something grabbed my hair and yanked me backward. I rolled over and got up, but nothing was there, at least nothing that I could see. Chrissy jumped up, grabbed two of the steak knives from the block and started chasing me around the kitchen table. It would have been comical just like we had done many other times, chasing each other and laughing. But no one was laughing now and my life was on the line. A kitchen chair moved itself in my way, making me trip and fall. I jumped back up before she got to me, but I felt something brush against the back of my leg. I glanced back and she had sliced a gash in it. We continued around the table, but I knew that I had to go somewhere that I could use open space to run away and get some distance between us. "You're not as fun as Mrs. Henderson was," I heard the mask say. "She screamed and begged like a good little girl. She didn't run like you." The shock hit me like a sledgehammer. The mask had used my daughter to kill the neighbor. I knew now more than ever that I had to get that thing off of her and destroy it. I ran out the front door, not even thinking that I was only wearing a nightshirt and underwear. I knew that I needed help. I ran to the next door neighbor's house and beat on their door yelling for help. Chrissy burst out of the house and saw me and then ran after me. I went to the next neighbor and beat on their door and then the next, all the while with a little girl wearing a mask chasing me. After 3 houses, people started coming out to see what was going on. I doubled back to where a few of my neighbors had gathered. "Help me," I said. "I need to get that mask off of her." They looked from me to a charging Chrissy holding 2 knives. I ran away and the neighbors parted like the Red Sea. There was a tree in our yard that had branches low enough to climb, but Chrissy hadn't been able to reach them yet. I climbed up, my bare feet slipping on the bark as I tried to make it out of reach. She came at me so fast that I knew I wouldn't make it, and I would be a sitting duck for her to slice and dice. But at the last moment, my feet gained enough traction to get me up to the first branch. She jumped and slashed at me, but all the blades cut was thin air. She stood under the branch, jumping and slashing at me in vain. She was still doing it when the police arrived and took her away. I jumped down, nearly tangling myself in the branch, and I ran after the police. "Wait, please, that's my daughter," I said. They had restrained and disarmed her, but not taken off the mask. I pulled it off with much more effort than it should have taken and threw it as far away from her as I could. When it was finally off, Chrissy's eyes searched around as if waking from a dream. Her eyes landed on me. "Mommy," she said. "Yes, sweetie," I said, wrapping her in a big hug. Ma'am," one of the officers said. "Are you sure that's wise? This girl was just trying to kill you." "It wasn't her, it was that thing," I said, pointing at the mask. But it was gone. I visit her every day in the mental hospital. The staff there are quite fond of her and say she's the most delightful patient that they've ever had. None of them believe why she's there. They all say that it must have been some mistake. I know that it was too. It was a mistake to ever buy that mask. Today's episode is sponsored by Uncommon Goods. Spark something uncommon this holiday season with incredible hand-picked gifts from Uncommon Goods. They make your holiday shopping stress-free by scouring the globe for original, handmade, and absolutely remarkable things for everyone on your list. These gifts spark joy, wonder, delight, and that it's exactly what I wanted feeling. A few of my favorite items are the personalized pushpin map. It's handmade and customized to help you map the adventures that you've taken so far. Along with that, I really like the 12 days of gourmet nuts. I mean, what's better than chowing down while going through the holiday countdown? When you shop at Uncommon Goods, you're supporting artists and small independent businesses. Many of their handcrafted products are made in small batches, so shop now before they sell out this holiday season. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/MrCreeps. That's uncommongoods.com/MrCreeps for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary. On the evening of Halloween 1993, a family on their way to Cheyenne stopped their station wagon in the middle of a desolate road after seeing a 10-year-old girl walking by herself. They had been alarmed at the sight of the kid wandering around without her parents in the middle of nowhere and wanted to give her a helping hand. The child was dressed in a Halloween costume, a skeleton to be precise, and was later described to the police as disoriented and confused. When the family asked the child what she was doing on the road all by herself, she said that she was trying to find her way back to her hometown, Ataraxia Springs. The father and the family brought out his map from the car, but soon realized that there was no such town in Wyoming. That child walking by herself on that fateful Halloween night was me. The events described above are well documented, and no one is contesting the way that I was found. But how I ended up on that road all by myself was never fully explained. There had been no missing children reports filed fitting my description, and they were never able to locate my parents, even though I told them their full names and phone number. All they had to go by was my own story about what had happened that night, a story that they couldn't believe. In the end, after several years of therapy, I didn't believe it either. I accepted the fact that I had most likely been kidnapped by awful people, or perhaps even born into that horrific fate, and chosen to forget it and replace it with my own version of the truth. I was taught that when memories contradict reality, it must be the memories that are wrong, and not the other way around. It made sense to me, and I slowly came to terms with the fact that my childhood memories were false. It wasn't until last week that I had reasons to revisit these memories of mine. Something happened that made me doubt what all those years of therapy taught me. That's why I've decided to share my story once more, partly for my own sake, just to make my memories merge with physical reality on the paper, if that makes any sense, but also to reach out to others who might have experienced something similar, and might also be wondering if that old, strange memory of theirs might in fact have happened after all. Some of the details in this story are based on a diary entry that I wrote down after I had been found, but I still remember most of what had happened vividly, and I remember Ataraxia Springs, It was built around an old tuberculosis sanatorium that had been closed down after the discovery of antibiotics in the late 20s. This detail was drilled into our brains during school, since our town took its own history very seriously. The sanatorium itself was built across the lake beside the town, where it was still standing. The older kids had a lot of ghost stories about the rundown building, stories that they loved to tell around the campfire on the beach, with Ataraxia Sanatorium casting its frightening shadow on the water from the other side of the lake. Other than this piece of history, the town was your average American town. My parents, not my foster parents, but the ones that were never found, were good to me and my older sister. They gave us a happy childhood and a nice neighborhood, and as far as I can remember, if it is a memory at all, nothing was out of the ordinary. Not until that night. Halloween was a big deal in our neighborhood, and everyone always tried to outdo each other with their costumes. This year wasn't any different. The air was filled with excitement, and I really loved the skeleton suit that my dad had bought me. My sister was a bit too old for trick-or-treating, but she had promised to do it with me so that our parents could stay home and hand out candy to the other kids, and most likely have some time to themselves. It was all going well until my sister's punk rocker friends showed up on their bikes. I hated them. They were Ryan, Johnny, and Ashley. They gave the neighborhood a bad reputation, or so everyone thought, and they always teased me. "Hey, Marjorie," Brian shouted to my sister. "How are you babysitting tonight out of all nights?" Ryan continued and said that they were going to the sanatorium. I don't remember which words he used exactly, but he said something about it being the perfect night for it, and that it was a shame that she had me tied around her ankle like a shackle. I was already afraid, looking up at their tall bikes at the end of the cul-de-sac, because I knew what was coming next. I looked up at my sister and I grabbed her hand. Back then, I thought of her almost as an adult, even though she was just a teenager. She hesitated, and there was some arguing back and forth until it was decided that she would bring me with them. "Come on, Melissa," she said, and looked at me as my heart sunk into my belly. "What's the worst that can happen? It'll be fun for you too, just like one of the adventures in your favorite movies." I said no, but she told me not to be such a crybaby. She didn't want to miss out on her friend's adventure, or some quality time with Ryan. I was an inconvenience, and although my sister tried to convince me that it would be fun for me too, I remember feeling like a fifth wheel. My sister left me with her friends for a few minutes, while she sneaked into the garage to grab her bike. It felt like hours. Ryan lit a cigarette with his Zippo. I couldn't understand what my sister saw in him. With his black mohawk, combat boots, and leather jacket with FU painted on its back, he looked more like the villain in the Disney movies that I loved to watch than the prince. My sister wasn't like him at all. She was one of the popular girls at school who everybody loved and aspired to be like, and to my mind at the time, it just didn't compute how someone as sweet as my sister could have a thing for someone like Ryan. It infuriated me. I wanted to run home and tell my mom, but I knew that it would just lead to an ugly fight. My sister put me on the carrier of her bike and told me to hold on to her. We took the shortcut through the woods, which meant a bumpier ride. The sun was already setting, and the closer it came to the horizon, the faster my heart beat in my chest. Their laughter echoed between the trees, like hyenas on the hunt. I was so mad at my sister, but also at myself for letting her take me along. The water in the lake was still this night, reflecting the dark clouds above. They left their bikes in the sand. Marjorie grabbed my hand and followed the others to the old boathouse at the edge of the beach. I tried not to look across the lake, where the sanatorium rose up from the treetops, like an evil castle from the movies. There was an old rowboat inside of the boathouse. A wind was building up outside, sending small waves inside that lapped up against the side of the boat. I felt a lump in my throat. Water wasn't my element. I could swim, but if I couldn't reach the bottom with my feet, I used to panic. So, sitting in a fragile old rowboat with a bunch of renegades didn't sit well with me. I held my sister's jacket as tight as I could in the boat. Ryan kicked the boat out of the house and grabbed the oars. There wasn't that much space, and every time the boat rocked, I closed my eyes and tensed up in anticipation. Marjorie's friends teased me when they saw how scared I was, especially Ashley. "Many kids have drowned in this lake," she said. "There is something living at the bottom that feeds on little girls like you." She laughed. "Let's hope it's sleeping tonight." "Don't be mean," my sister said. "I don't believe in any of those stories." "There have been some strange things happening in this area though," Johnny said. "My dad told me that a couple went missing around the lake like 20 years ago." I didn't want to hear about it. He sounded serious, not like he was teasing. I looked at my sister to see if she believed him, but I couldn't tell. And then Johnny continued. "They were never found. Maybe they just decided to ditch this boring town," Ryan said with a smirk. "Sure," Johnny said, "but their disappearance isn't the strangest thing about this. While they searched for them, they found this old dude wandering around in the forest who claimed he was the guy who had disappeared. He was taken in as a suspect since he was way too old to be that guy. They never got any answers from him though. He took care of himself in his cell before they could question him. My dad was the one to find him." We reached the other side of the lake, just beneath the sanatorium. It smelled of old seaweed and rotten eggs. Decaying reed crunched under our feet as we stepped ashore. A couple of ducks flew away, scared by our presence. I held my sister's hand. The sky was covered in heavy clouds and a rumble spread among them. This was the first time any of us stepped foot on the other side of the lake, and I could see that my sister was afraid as well, even though she tried to hide it behind her exaggerated smiles towards Ryan. He lit up another cigarette. "Let's go," he said. "I've always been curious about this place." We followed him up an overgrown road. Something rustled in the bushes. I asked my sister what it was, hoping that she would calm my nerves, but instead, Ryan answered, "There are ghouls hiding in there, so don't go too close." "Don't listen to him," my sister said. "It's just birds." But I was already terrified. It wasn't just these scary noises, but the entire atmosphere around this place. It just didn't feel right. Something in the air felt off. Ordinary things came off as strangely unfamiliar. The leaves on the ground seemed too large, the trees too tall, and the sky too vicious. The courtyard was covered in gravel, but there was decayed grass sprouting up from it here and there. Slowly, we approached these stairs to the entrance. "Can't we go back now?" I asked my sister in a whisper. "Do we have to go inside?" The doors were locked. Ryan pulled at them as hard as he could, hoping that the old doors wouldn't stand a chance against his strength. But they wouldn't move an inch, and it made me relieved, but Ryan was relentless. He insisted on trying to find another way inside. We walked around the building, struggling through the brushy terrain, until we found a small rusty door at the other side. The purpose behind this door was difficult to figure out, since it was almost completely inaccessible. To my great disappointment, it was open. As soon as we had closed the door behind us, the thunder outside intensified in an instant, and hard rain banged on the door. Ryan lit a Zippo. revealing a small corridor inside a large cellar. The cold air smelled musty. There was graffiti on the walls, dating back a long time by the looks of it. Ryan slowly moved his lighter across the wall, reading a text that had been sprayed on it with a dark red color. "If you close the door, it's already too late." "What's that supposed to mean?" Johnny said. Ashley, scared for the first time this night, tried to open the door again, but it wouldn't budge. "Come on, guys, I can't get it open," she said, just as if she suddenly sensed some kind of danger. "Help me out, would ya?" Ryan and Johnny joined her, but no matter how much they tried, the door remained closed. "Marjorie," I looked up at my sister. "What's happening? I'm afraid." I don't know. It was unlocked just moments ago," Ashley yelled. Everyone was freaking out, yelling at each other until Ryan raised his voice. "Enough!" He paused to make sure that everyone was quiet. "Let's just find a way up to the main entrance and exit from there. Worst case scenario, we climb up out of one of the windows. Come on, relax." My sister relaxed her grip around my hand, clearly calmed down by Ryan's words. "I have a really bad feeling about this place," Ashley said. "I don't know. It just washed over me like a frickin' tsunami. This strange feeling of, I don't know, just a scary feeling. Of dread," my sister asked with a shaky voice. "I felt it too." "You're all getting worked up about nothing," Ryan said. "Get it together." "It's all your fault," I said. "You shouldn't tell us what to do. This was your stupid idea." "Shut up, Melissa," my sister said, blushing from embarrassment. "What?" I said. "Mom is right. Your friends have a bad influence on you." "Shut up," my sister yelled. "My God, Melissa." Ryan laughed. "It's okay," he said. "She's just scared." "Moms suck," Johnny added with a smile, but still shaken up just like the rest of us. "I hate my mom. She's always telling me what to do and how to dress and what to think and whatnot." I crossed my arms in anger at their attitudes that had clearly gotten us into trouble. "Well, if you listened to your mom, maybe you wouldn't be trapped here, would you?" "We aren't trapped," Ryan said and led the way through the dark corridor. It felt like we walked around the cellar for more than an hour without finding a staircase. And when we did, it didn't lead to the main floor but rather to the floor above it. It didn't make any sense. We came to a ward filled with old beds. The windows were large but too high up for any of us to reach them. In that sense, the room reminded me of the church downtown. The windows vibrated for every lightning strike outside. Johnny pointed to one of the beds. Unlike the others, it wasn't empty. We approached it carefully. My sister covered my eyes when we came close enough to see what it was. But their scared voices and Ashley's screams told me all that I needed to know. "She must have been gone for decades," Johnny said. "I mean, the body is mummified." "Oh my God." It was Ashley. "She is wearing my watch." "Your watch? It's a coincidence, I mean," Ryan said, but was interrupted by Ashley. "What does it mean? Why the heck is she wearing my watch?" "We need to get out of here," my sister said. "This is a person. We need to call the..." "Where did the lower part of the body go?" Johnny said. "It looks like it was ripped." No, Ashley cried. "It's not a coincidence. It's my watch." "But you're still wearing it," Ryan said. "Marjorie's right. I think we need to report this." We left the room, all scared to the bones. I know that I'm wearing my watch, but her watch had the exact same crack in the glass and everything. I know it doesn't make any sense, but that was my watch. She cried, holding on to Johnny. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything, Ryan said. It was just a coincidence. We kept trying to find a way out, but the inside of the building was like a maze. My legs ached after walking so much. Another terror erupted from my core and spread out to my skin in the form of a cold shiver. By now I understood. Our parents must have begun to worry, maybe even gone out to look for us. I felt bad for having disobeyed them, and I feared their punishment even though they would probably just ground me for a week. Had I known that I would never see them again, I would probably have felt something else entirely. We took some rest inside a small library that must have been used by the patients back in the day. The shelves were still filled with books, but they had all decayed over the decades. I sat down next to my sister on what had once been a luxury's divan. "Are we in danger?" I asked. "Are we not going to get out?" "No," my sister said. "It just looks scary, but there's no one here. We just need to find Oh, what's this?" Ashley said, now a bit calmer than before. "It's beautiful." She removed a newspaper from the floor and picked up a golden sphere the size of a cannonball. "It's pretty heavy. If it's real gold, it must be worth a fortune." We all placed ourselves around her and watched our reflections in the shiny surface of the sphere, transfixed by its perfection. And that's when we heard a crash from further up the hallway outside of the library, followed by a scraping sound just as if something large was being dragged over the floor. I froze in fear when I heard that it was moving in our direction. "What the heck is that?" Johnny said. "Ryan, go and check it out." Ryan hesitated, unable to decide if to be brave or to listen to his instincts. He gave my sister a quick look, and she shook her head as if to tell him not to go. The most horrifying sound I've ever heard came from whatever was slithering through the hallway. It sounded like an oversized pigeon, but also like the snickering from an old wedge. "Dude, I'm sorry," Ryan said. "There's no way that I'm going out there." We retreated to the next room, a recreational room with a pool table. Ashley still held the gold sphere in her hands. Another crash just outside. It sounded like the entire door and some of the walls to the library had been completely destroyed. The cooing and snickering intensified. There was excitement behind it. The same kind of excitement you would expect from a starving hag in a fairy tale who's just about to feast on an innocent child. We were all standing behind Ryan, looking into the library. A shadow appeared on the floor, followed by an enormous gray hand with black claw-like nails. We all screamed in unison and backed up against the pool table, but there was nowhere to go from there. The hand grabbed the floorboards and dragged whatever body it was attached to closer to our room. I was so scared that my knees were shaking. The menacing cooing was so loud now that I had to put my trembling fingers in my ears. My sister repeated the prayers that she so reluctantly told in church. There were tears in her eyes. Another giant hand, dragging its body even closer, but still not into view outside of the room. "Help me out," Ryan said. He picked up a few books from the floor and lit them on fire with his lighter. Johnny joined him. I'm sure my sister would have helped as well, but she had to take care of me. Ashley dropped the sphere and hid behind the pool table, crying hysterically. Slowly, the monster dragged itself into view, and my sister released a guttural scream. I wanted to look away, but I was paralyzed by fear. The creature faced us. It was nothing more than a giant, saggy head that pulled itself forward with its long arms that were attached to its temples. A few long strands of black hair grew on top of it, and it had a long, crooked nose above its terrifying mouth. It was enough to make it the most dreadful thing I've ever seen. But what made it even worse were its eyes. Two enormous, expressionless, golden spheres. We could see our own reflections in them. It went cooing and it licked its gray lips with its black tongue. It was just about to stick its arms into the doorframe and rip it apart, when Ryan and Johnny began throwing the burning books at it. It backed away, screaming like an oversized infant. "Come on," Ryan called out. "Let's go." My sister picked me up in her arms. We ran past the monster while it was still deflecting the flames, but Ashley was too late. The second that she appeared in the doorway, she was grabbed by the legs and pulled into the mouth of the monster. She cried out for help in a state of utter panic, but the sharp, large teeth cut through her legs. The crunch when they went through her bones was chilling to hear. Johnny stepped forward and grabbed Ashley's hands. He pulled until the thread still attached to her legs separated, and we dragged her into the hallway, leaving a trail of red on the floor, and continued into another ward. Ryan and Johnny put her into a bed. She was still alive, but the old sheets quickly turned red from the liquid pouring out from beneath her waist. "We're back," she said. Can't you see?" Johnny cried at the bedside. "No, we'll get you to a hospital." The cooing echoed through the hallway. "No," Ashley said. "This is it for me. I love you. Now go." Johnny kissed her face as she lost consciousness. No, don't. I love you too." "I'm sorry," my sister said, "but it's almost here. We have to get the heck out of here." The monster spat something out that landed with a bang outside of the door. It was one of the golden spheres. It sounded hungry now, and we ran for our lives. More hallways and more staircases, more wards and offices, but no exit. However impossible as it may sound, the building was bigger on the inside than on the outside. The queen stopped behind us. We slowed down. My sister put me back on the ground and let me walk by myself. She was too tired to carry me any further. "This place goes on forever," Jenny said. "It's a nightmare. There's no end to it. That text on the wall, it was right. It's too late. We're just running in circles, going back in time." My God, Ashley. It was really her that we saw. "There's a way out," Ryan said. "We just haven't found it yet." "What's wrong with this place?" my sister said. "It's like the laws of nature don't apply here. And that horrible thing back there. Are there more of them? It must have come straight out of hell. It spat one of those spears out too, did you see that?" "Hell is a place on earth," Ryan said. He tried to light a cigarette, but his hands were shaking too much. Those golden spears looked like its eyes, and perhaps their eyes too. It spat them out to see further, you know. It appeared when we found the first one, and it sped up after it had spit out the second one. I screamed. "What is it?" my sister asked. "Bugs," I said. "Look around that crack." Hundreds of them were crawling around a crack in the floor. Small black beetles with green spots on their backs. I hated bugs. "It's okay," my sister said. "Just don't step on them." "I've never seen any bug like that before," I said. We moved forward until we came to an empty swimming pool. Several golden spheres lay at the bottom of it, shining in a strange moonlight coming in through the windows at the other end of the room. The faint cooing started as soon as we saw them, now coming from several different directions. I cried, but not because of the cooing. I was seeing something in the corner of the ceiling, a black shadow that slowly unfolded itself. "There are more of those heads," Johnny said. "Can you hear it?" "What is that?" Ryan said as soon as he saw the shadow. One leg after another extended out of the shadow until 8 long, monstrous legs had appeared out of its body, like an enormous spider. We ran next to the pool to get to the exit at the other end of the room. The spider quickly came down from its hiding spot, climbed down the pool and continued towards us. The legs weren't attached to a body of their own, but to the back of a decaying human one. I screamed for my sister to pick me up, but there wasn't any time for that. I had to run, faster than I'd ever run before. "Holy crap," Johnny said. "God, no, oh no." The spider was just about to pierce me with one of its legs when we entered the door, which fortunately was too small for the spider to enter. "Holy crap, that was close," Ryan said as we ran further away from the swimming pool. "No, no, no," Johnny continued, tears forming in his eyes. "How is this possible? It can't be." "At least we got away from it this time," Ryan said. "Let's hope that we won't end up back." "It's not that," Johnny said. "The body," he cried now. "That body attached to those legs. It was wearing my jacket. Oh, God, no. Maybe it doesn't have to happen like that," my sister said. "Maybe we can avoid it." "Well, it didn't work out so well for Ashley, did it?" Johnny said. "And besides, how do you avoid something like that? We don't know how it could happen in the first place." "Calm down," Ryan said. "Let's stay focused on the here and now, okay? I'm feeling a breeze. Are you feeling it too?" He was right. We all felt it. Thinking that it was an exit, we ran in the direction of its source. But it wasn't a way out. At least not the one that we had been looking for. We came to a large balcony with open doors looking out over an unimaginable view. "I told you," my sister said as we stepped onto the balcony. "We're in hell." In front of us, a landscape made out of living flesh and bone spread out all the way to the horizon beneath the scarlet sky. The ground itself was moving as if it was breathing, and the leafless trees moved their branches like tentacles. Enormous creatures walked across the surface, fighting each other, and the flesh of these screaming birds above us was exposed to the weather. A strong smell of meat and brimstone filled the warm winds. Slowly, a dark gas giant with violent clouds rose to the sky like a black sun, and the monsters howled excitedly to the sight of it. "I don't know about hell," Ryan said, "but it definitely isn't Earth." Millions of bugs erupted from large pores in the ground, swarming in front of the colossal planet climbing the sky. A few of them landed on the balcony. It was these same type of bugs that we had seen earlier. And then Johnny sneezed, followed by what looked like a panic attack. "Crap," he said. "It crawled into my nose." "Seriously?" Ryan asked. "I can still feel it crawling around inside of my sinus," Johnny said while trying to blow it out of his nose. "Help me, please. I think it's eating its way." He sounded dizzy. "Let's get back inside," Ryan said, even though we were already running back. We didn't get far until Johnny fell down on the floor, convulsing and foaming at the mouth. My sister picked me up, knowing full well what was about to happen. But Ryan sat down next to Johnny and tried to help him in whatever way he could. But there wasn't any hope for Johnny. The convulsions turned into jerks and jolts erupting from his back. Ryan stood up, pale from the sight of his best friend shaking uncontrollably in front of him. After about a minute, the seizure stopped abruptly. Johnny opened his eyes, a bit groggy. What happened?" he said. "Why am I on the floor?" "Are you okay, man?" Ryan said, smiling. "I thought that we were gonna lose ya." My sister wasn't convinced and took a few steps back with me. "Yeah," Johnny said, smiling back and trying to get back up on his feet. "I feel fine, but that was wild." A sudden jolt spread through his body. "Wait." And then he screamed. He touched his back and it was covered in red. He screamed again, much louder this time. I heard his jacket being torn apart from the inside, and a slimy spider leg grew from his back. He begged us to help him as his face twisted in pain, but there was nothing that we could do. Ryan backed up to my sister, grabbing her hand, and the process was quick. One leg after the other shot out from Johnny's back as he was screaming. He tried to crawl away, but the legs wouldn't let him. Instead, they stood up, carrying Johnny above the ground. "Help me," he said as the legs began walking away with him. "No, don't let it happen, please. Help me." The legs walked away from us with him, and none of us dared to do anything. "I'm still alive," we cried. "There must be a way." The legs climbed up the wall and walked into another hallway. "No!" We heard Johnny yell as he struggled, fruitlessly trying to grab the wall with his fingernails. "Please, no!" We stood frozen in our places until his screams faded out completely, leaving us with a faint echo of his last words between his sobs. "Mom, I'm scared. Mom." It wasn't until the cooing increased that we began moving again. Standing still was unspeakable in this place. My sister kept me close to her and herself close to Ryan. We reached a small room with an old piano standing against one of the walls. It was a dead end, but there was something going on behind the piano that my sister insisted on investigating. A flickering light, bright and warm like sunbeams. My sister sat down next to the piano and tried to see what it was. "It's a way out," she said. "I can't see where it leads, but it smells like the outside." "Oh, really?" I said, happiness spreading to my body. "Can we finally get out of?" Something heavy bounced against the floor outside of the room and slowly rolled in view in the door opening. My relief was immediately replaced by dread. It was one of the golden spheres. "Help me move the piano," my sister said. "Now, Ryan." I looked at them struggling with it. The monster dragged itself closer and closer while snickering and cooing louder and louder. I screamed when it appeared in front of me. Ryan and my sister used all of their strength to push the piano up to the door, blocking it. It wouldn't last long, but perhaps long enough. My sister returned to me, but Ryan wasn't so lucky. The monster reached above the piano with its long arm and grabbed him. He didn't have much time to speak, and he knew it. He picked his word carefully. Perhaps he hadn't said them before. "I love you, Marjorie." I looked up at my sister and her trembling lips in an attempt to avoid the sight of him being pulled out into the hallway and eaten, but I could still hear it loud and clear. The hole in the wall wasn't so much a hole as an unstable rift in reality. There was a forest on the other side, but just for a few seconds before it changed into a desert that in turn changed into a beach. The beast outside pushed the piano into the room. There was no time to think. My sister picked me up and threw me through the rift. I landed on a forest floor, but not the one we had seen at first because in this forest it was dark outside. I saw the rift floating in the air. My sister was just about to jump through it, the monster's hand reaching for her, when the rift vanished. I stumbled through the woods until I came to the road, trying to find my way back home. The rest is history. As I said, over the years they convinced me that my story was nothing more than a manufactured memory, made in a subconscious attempt at coping with some trauma. But something happened, and I now think that the coping strategy might actually have been to let myself be convinced that this never happened. Last week, I received a letter. It wasn't sent by mail but delivered by a middle-aged man who claimed that he had found it among his great-great-grandmother's things somewhere in Paris. I sat down at my kitchen table and looked at the envelope. To be delivered to my sister, Melissa Johansson, in case she's ever found after I'm gone. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. It was dated 1970. Tears ran down my face as I read it. It told the story of a teenage girl who had mysteriously appeared in Wyoming in 1889 claiming to come from a small town called Ataraxia Springs. She had gone on to live an adventurous and fulfilling life, surviving 2 world wars and seeing civilization go from horse and carriages to men landing on the moon. She had married, had a son that she had named Ryan, and spent the rest of her life in Europe. She was known for searching for her sister, the man said, but she never told anyone this. I thought it was fiction or the result of a well-hidden mental illness, but when I found the old reports of a young girl in Wyoming telling people that she came from a little town known as Ataraxia Springs, well, it can't be a coincidence, can it? By now, I was crying my eyes out, but it was bittersweet tears. This meant that I would never see Marjorie again, but it also meant that she had survived that horrible night and that she had lived a good life. The letter ended, "All these years and I still think of you every day. I miss you." And between my sobs, I whispered, "I miss you too." Yeah, it's true. Halloween and all things associated with it are entirely forbidden in my hometown. Now, before you go chunking pumpkin spice lattes at me and typing hocus pocus quotes in all caps, hear me out. There is a very good reason for this. I grew up in a small town near Phoenix, Arizona, though I can't say which one for reasons that I'll get into later. Many years ago, Halloween was celebrated just like it is everywhere else. Kids trick-or-treating, costume parties, autumn leaves bristling in the tranquil wind, and that poignant, spooky atmosphere that so many adore. However, all of that changed on Halloween night of 1983. It was a normal holiday by most accounts, but what most were blissfully unaware to at the time is what became of dear old Mabel Hannafin. Mabel was a kind woman in her early 80s, a widow who spent most of her days tending to her garden. Halloween was one of her favorite times of the year, as she loved getting the visits from children and spoiling them with sugary goodies. It was her own personal tradition to plop a nice, juicy red delicious apple along with the candy that she gave out, in hopes that the children wouldn't indulge themselves too greatly. That night was the last time anyone ever saw her. It was discovered 3 days later by a neighbor that Mabel hadn't been seen in quite some time. Police did a welfare check and found no trace of the woman. Her 2 pet beagles were near starvation, but luckily, they were discovered in time to make a full recovery. The same cannot be said for poor Mabel, however. Multiple interviews with parents escorting their children that evening, and even some with children themselves, reported nothing out of the ordinary. Many of them attested to having visited at Mabel's home, and she seemed as cheery as ever. No one had seen or heard anything of real interest, and there were no signs of struggle or injury inside Mabel's home. None of her extended family around the country had heard anything from her either. It was as if the woman had just vanished off the face of the earth. We were all saddened by the news, but time went on, and people got on with their lives. Before long, the next Halloween arrived. The usual festivities began once more, and a troubling pattern first emerged. There was another local woman named Jessica Marshall who was home alone that night. She and her husband, David, had just gotten married a few months prior, and his work as a landscape surveyor had him away from the house that evening. David was a wealthy and also paranoid person. He had installed a security system to protect his home and wife while he was away. He later admitted that the actual reason he did this was to make sure his wife wasn't cheating on him while he was away. But regardless, it wasn't enough to save her. Once more, that night was the last time anyone ever saw Jessica. It didn't take David long to notice, and soon after, he contacted the local police department in a panic. Just like with Mabel, The police were unable to find any incriminating pieces of evidence at the scene, nor were they able to find any trace of Jessica's whereabouts. The only thing in the house that seemed to indicate anything strange was the spilled bowl of Halloween candy. Police sat down with David and reviewed the tapes manually soon after. They quickly found something odd, but it was not what they expected. It was 10:17 that evening, and the once bustling streets had since fallen relatively still as the trick-or-treaters returned home to gorge on their treats. That was when two figures were seen approaching the door of Jessica and David's house. One of them was dressed as a pumpkin, and the other as a scarecrow. From their voices and stature, it was determined they were both children between the ages of 8 and 11, one girl and one boy. Jessica answered the door, dressed in pajamas, and greeted them much as she had with dozens of other kids that same night. "Trick or treat," the children both spoke in unison, with a tone that seemed devoid of the excitement exhibited by the kids previous. Jessica complimented their costumes and turned to fetch the bowl of candies. The children remained completely motionless as Jessica turned away. She returned a moment later, clutching the bowl in hand. "You guys are out pretty late tonight, huh?" Jessica reached out towards them, but paused as she seemed to notice that neither of them were carrying candy buckets or bags. How are you going to be able to carry these?" The children just held out their hands and said nothing. Jessica hesitated, but then reached towards them slowly. "Are your parents with you?" Jessica asked, dropping the candies into their outstretched hands. "No, we're alone," the boy replied. "Are you lost? Do you need me to call them?" Jessica asked, and the little boy in the scarecrow costume nodded. "Okay. Do you know their number?" "Can we come in?" The girl spoke, interrupting Jessica. She appeared a bit taken aback by the question, and recoiled a bit in the doorway. She was seen locking eyes with the young girl for several seconds before finally replying, Sure, you can wait here while I call them." Jessica then gestured the two children inside, and the door closed behind them. The door remained shut until David came home the following day at around 6 p.m. There were never any screams or sounds of a fight, and the children were never seen exiting the house from any of these several security cameras. Police scoured the house with a team of watchdogs, but they found nothing. No trace of Jessica or the children. The only thing out of sorts was the spilled bowl of candies on the ground. Just like Mabel exactly 1 year previous, no one ever saw or heard from Jessica again. David was regarded as the prime suspect for both cases, until his completely distraught nature, solid alibi, and lack of unifying evidence all but exonerated him from both. Tragically, David took his own life in the following months, unable to cope with the loss of his wife. The next year was when it really hit the fan though, as 3 others were declared missing. Mark Kemper, Allison Voss, and Lydia Kaminsky, all taken from separate locations, and all believed to have vanished within minutes of one another. The police had started to suspect that there was some kind of highly elaborate kidnapping scheme that used the children as bait. Unlike the previous 2 years, however, this time, there was a witness. Kelsey Bergman was at first incredibly reluctant to come forward, but reassurance from her parents and police desperation prodded her into an interview. She looked petrified when they brought her in, with deep pits under her eyes and behavior akin to those who have suffered an immensely traumatic experience. Kelsey was 17 at the time, and was home alone that night when someone rang the doorbell. Kelsey got up, thinking it was just more trick-or-treaters. She opened the door and found 2 children waiting patiently on the front step, 1 girl and 1 boy. She says the little girl was dressed as a witch, while the boy was dressed in a skeleton outfit. She said they appeared soaking wet, but showed no concern despite the sub-zero temperatures. Kelsey then noticed their eyes were entirely black, devoid of pigmentation of any kind, Trick or treat. They both spoke once again in unison, and once again without any sort of emotional inflection. Kelsey gave them candy, and the girl asked if they could come inside because they were cold. Kelsey said that was when the red flags started waving in her mind, and she was suddenly very uncomfortable with the situation. Instead of allowing them in, Kelsey gave them a few towels and phoned the police. That decision probably saved her life. For the 20 minutes it took for an officer to arrive, Kelsey said the children did nothing but stare at her through the front window. She doesn't think they blinked even once. Before the officer arrived, however, the children just walked away, back out into the night. Kelsey called out to them, trying to get them to wait in case they were actually just some lost kids, but the two did not respond. She didn't even know what to tell the police officers when they finally showed up. It was a strange account, and not all were so quick to believe it. Nevertheless, it was a break for the police who took it and ran with it. Despite their efforts, very little progress was made. By this point, the town had caught wind of everything that was going on. They demanded answers and closure to the bizarre string of cases. People were really starting to get nervous. In what had been one of the worst PR decisions of all time, the police chief admitted they were still investigating, and without a prime suspect or even a real motive. Many people in the town then turned on them, with some even whispering that the cops themselves were in on it. In a desperate bid to calm the tensions and prevent further incidents, the mayor pulled an unprecedented move. He said that for the safety of the community, they would implement a curfew each night on October 31st, and an outright ban on parties, costumes that conceal the face, and the act of trick-or-treating. And just like that, Halloween became illegal. The town hall in which all this took place was met with a stunned silence. All in attendance seemed dumbfounded that they had actually suggested banning a holiday to try and stop the disappearances. None were very happy with the compromise, but they reluctantly held to it for the safety of their families. The next Halloween may have been the worst of all. No one went missing this time, but more sightings of the children were reported. Dozens more. That was just the beginning though. There was an immense storm that night. Thunder and lightning crashed while a torrential wind pounded the city. All throughout the night, people reported seeing shadows outside their homes and hearing whispers from their closets, basements, and attics. It's hard to say how much of it is true and how much was the result of a petrified town with wild imaginations. However, the things they found the next day were beyond dispute. Main Street was covered by thousands of dead birds of many different species. Many blamed the storm for being responsible, despite the fact that some of the breeds had never been recorded in the area. Some were never even identified. A young boy, Carson Ruse, was found folded up and crammed inside the trunk of an old oak tree. People reported sightings of a large, black dog-like creature with piercing red eyes roaming the woods at night. Days later, and a baby was born with a severe birth defect. Its head was malformed and almost elongated like that of a jackal. There were also odd growths upon its shoulder blades, completed with accompanying tendons and muscle tissue. The infant only survived for a few hours, but many thought the growths looked almost like wings. Police were at a loss, and on the brink of riots they called an assembly to address the increasingly horrifying incidents. Many in the town spoke their piece, with the majority focusing their ire upon the authorities who had failed to stop these events. Our town was the old-school religious type, and many believed it had been cursed by God. The police chief reaffirmed that Halloween would remain illegal, and that he would double efforts and resources to uncover the truth behind what was going on. The audience fell into a stunned silence, until a low grumbling chuckle emerged from the back row. "That won't stop it," the voice of a man called out. All in attendance turned back to see him rise to his feet amidst the crowd. He was a tall man, slender with fierce, black eyebrows and a slight grin that seemed to be perpetually stapled to his face. "And who are you?" one of the council members asked, speaking the question that all had on their minds. The tall man smirked and introduced himself as Atticus Stone. He claimed he was a soothsayer, and he had been guided by dreams to help the town in their time of crisis. Now, most people would scoff at the mere suggestion of what he would go on to claim, but our community was a deeply religious one. Some might even venture to say a deeply gullible one as well. Mr. Stone claimed the gates of hell had cracked open, and all manner of foul things had begun to escape from the abyss. He said it was the beginning stages of the rapture, and there was no longer any sense in praying to God, as he would not help us. He mentioned something about how that would break a certain oath, but he didn't elaborate further. Someone asked who the black-eyed children were, but Mr. Stone gave only a cryptic response. The lost ones. People were scared, and prepared to believe and do anything if it meant keeping themselves and their families safe. Trust in the police and the church plummeted to an all-time low, as the odd occurrences refused to relent, and slowly but surely, people turned to advice from the strange Mr. Atticus Stone. Stone professed that there is in fact a way to keep people safe during these turbulent times, but doing so required some alterations in tradition. He first instructed people to mount a signet upon the front door. It was some odd, hieroglyphic-looking crest or coat of arms, with two identical symbols in the center that looked like mere number 3s. If the two 3s were pushed inward, they would form an 8, or perhaps an inverted infinity symbol. I didn't know at the time if that was important, but before long, I began to see the symbol hanging on the doors of many houses in the town. Some saw this action as witchcraft, but Stone countered their accusations. He said it was not demons that we would pray to for protection, but instead an angel of the rapture. He explained that this particular angel had a great deal of power and was feared by all things wretched and devious. He gave it no direct name and referred to it only as the Lurker in Red. Stone then spoke of a new holiday that was to be conducted every year in October. Most people in town now called it Hell Month, but Stone had a different name for it. Matona Patrumus. And no, that's not a Harry Potter spell, I already checked. It is a month-long festival of sorts which has now been going on for 32 years. The first 15 days of the month are known as the Time of Blood. People are instructed to fight, cut themselves, and generally just be mean to anyone and everyone they came in contact with. There is also to be no weddings, birthday parties, or celebrations of any kind during this time. Even funerals are strictly forbidden. If someone happened to kick the bucket, then they would have to just be stuffed in the freezer until the allotted time was up. And that actually happened too. Not the freezer part, but the Time of Blood seems to coincide with a lot of heartache in the town. There is always a spike in suicides, domestic abuse, and assaults during that period. It may just be coincidence or heightened stress, but my grandfather did pass away during that time as well. The next 15 days of the month are basically the exact opposite of the first. It is known as the Time of Flesh, and it is a celebration with parties, dancing, and all the intoxicants you can get your hands on. People are encouraged to drink, take drugs, have sex, and indulge in any and all pleasures they can possibly think of. It started off tame for the first few years, but in time, it almost became a sort of Mardi Gras for us. Nowadays, it's not uncommon to see large street parties, opium dens, and moonlight orgies with dozens of participants. The degeneracy seemed to creep slowly and corrupt the people in town as the years went by. Former members of the church succumbed to the hedonism, and generally well-respected individuals began to indulge their deviant fantasies. I won't lie, I very much enjoyed this holiday growing up. The first half of the month sucked, but the rest was essentially just one giant party. The event is oddly cathartic in a way that I've never been able to replicate with anything else in life. It's almost as if the contrast of immense pain at the beginning of the month made the pleasures at the end infinitely more enjoyable. The last day of the month is reserved for the most important event of it all, the time of silence. Every October 31st, in place of Halloween, people in the town return to their homes, extinguish all the lights, and sleep in the same room as one another. No one is to step foot outside the house between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. for any purpose whatsoever. Those who have defied this rule have yet to be seen ever again. I remember those nights most vividly of all, not only because I was finally sober after a 2-week-long bender, but because of the sounds. It turns out the time of silence didn't always live up to its namesake. Sure, it was quiet most of the night, dead silence as a matter of fact, but every now and then you would hear an agonized scream in the distance, or animalistic snarls outside. God only knows what truly was happening on those nights, but honestly, I hope I never find out. The day we started listening to Atticus Stone was the day God truly abandoned our town. My father told me that once before he passed. He never wanted to talk about the tradition, but that night he was drunk enough to not restrict his tongue. I now wish I would have talked to him about it more. Stone made all of these citizens swear themselves to secrecy, and vowed to hunt down anyone who spilled his secrets to the outside world. It doesn't exactly bode well for me, but I've lived my life in fear of him and what he brought to our town. I won't live in fear anymore, come whatever may. For these reasons, I'm guessing none of you have ever heard of this strange tradition. Apparently Stone and his minions are pretty good at keeping secrets regarding what they're up to, but that's only half of it. You see, the weirdest thing about Stone's plan was that it actually seemed to work. Ever since the town had adopted the tradition, things have gotten a lot better. No more unexplained disappearances, sightings of obsidian-eyed children or other cryptids. Heck, even the property value has gone up. The town is booming in trade and has grown wealthy beyond expectation in the last few years. It's almost as if it's all too good to be true, which of course is how I first began thinking that it is. It turns out we might have really screwed things up. That's actually the reason I'm here telling this story now. You have to understand, when this all began, I was very young and, well, stupid. Sure, it was odd at first, but we all just sort of got on with life after things began improving. What I'm trying to say is that it's very difficult to recognize a cult for what it is when you're already in it. I finally moved away from the town a couple years after high school. It took only a few mentions of our hometown tradition to friends and subpar coworkers for me to really begin contemplating my entire upbringing. And that's when I really got curious about the whole thing. I started researching, and after months of searching, I finally found that strange symbol that we hang on our doors. It was in a place I really didn't want it to be either, an old book on voodoo and the occult. This symbol is closely associated with a familiar sounding entity, the lurker in red. It has another name too, but most strongly advise against speaking it or even writing it. Apparently, that's a good way to catch its attention, which is something you don't really want to do if you're not prepared. Names hold a great deal of power. This deity or force or whatever it is has qualities associated primarily with vengeance, wrath, and war. Sounds like a nice guy, huh? Strangely enough though, it is also associated with things like protection, family, and even the well-being of children. It's like if you mixed Rambo and Mary Poppins and then gave it supernatural abilities. There are a multitude of rituals and seances to gain favor with this being. It was a lengthy list, but one of them caught my eye and manifested an amorphous pit of dread in my gut as I read it. As it turns out, this holiday that we've been performing for the past 32 years is actually more like a ritual, designed to invoke the favor of the lurker in red. For me, the realization that my hometown had been performing an occult ritual for over 30 years and utilizing the power of some eldritch creature was troubling enough. But then I saw the other stories online and the pieces finally came together. I'm willing to bet that you've seen them too. Accounts posted on Reddit and other forums detailing someone's encounter with children whose eyes were entirely black. Most of the time, the children would behave in unsettling ways and ask the potential victim to let them inside. I'm sure a lot of these tales are just fiction by this point, but many people swear by their accounts, and those are the ones that I'm worried about. The thing is, I always assumed this phenomenon was isolated to our strange little town, and I think at one point it actually was. I don't think Atona Patromus was actually banishing them to hell as Stone had claimed. I think it just drove them elsewhere. Worse still, it might have actually exacerbated the problem. I have reckoned with this knowledge for the past decade at least, a horrible truth which has all but consumed my life. For those that may lambaste me for not speaking sooner upon it, I wouldn't blame you. Truth is that I'm afraid, not only of what Atticus Stone and his cohorts may do once they find out I exposed their secrets, but also of that thing they worship. This year marks the 33rd year of Atona Patromus, and I think that is significant. 33 is a number with a great many interesting qualities. The highest rank attainable in Scottish Rite Freemasonry is the 33rd degree. The Grand Orient de France of Freemasonry was founded in 1733. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and the United States added the Masonic Great Seal inscribed with the Latin words for New World Order onto the dollar bill. Harry S. Truman, a 33rd degree Freemason, became the 33rd President of the United States, and dropped the nuclear bombs upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which straddle the 33rd longitudinal parallel. Many interesting locations with paranormal histories also lie along parallel 33, including Jerusalem, Roswell, New Mexico, the Bermuda Triangle, the Pyramids of Giza. Some also believe Atlantis and the Garden of Eden were once located somewhere within the 33rd parallel. JFK was assassinated at the 33rd parallel, as was David Koresh, a cult leader killed at 33 years old. There have been many tragedies along the 33rd parallel, and I suggest looking into it for yourself, as there's no way I can list them all. Numerology lists several traits associated with the number 33, including enlightenment, conscious ascension, and spiritual birth. Many cultures and religions also place great significance upon the number as well. The Vedic religion of the Anglo-Indian tribes had 33 deities. The second level of Buddhist nirvana is called Trayastrimsa, which translates to belonging to the 33 devas. Islamic prayer beads generally have 33 beads, which correspond to their various names of God. The Christian Bible may hold the most references of all, though. The rule of King David in Jerusalem lasted 33 years. It is said that Jesus Christ performed a total of 33 miracles throughout the Gospels. He was then crucified in year 33 AD at the age of 33. Mount Hermon lies at 33 degrees longitude and 33 degrees latitude, and is said to be the place where the Nephilim first descended to Earth. The final book of the Bible, Revelation, also seems to revere the number. 333 is half the number of the beast who was said to arise in the era of the rapture. The beast is said to devour 1/3 of the stars in the sky and annihilate 1/3 of all life on Earth, or approximately 33.33%. The beast has many different names, including the Great Dragon, the Lie of Lies, but most interesting for our purposes, the Lurker in red. Now all of this may just be vague coincidence, and I'll be the first to admit that I don't know what it's all supposed to mean. I just find it rather poetic that our town lies near Phoenix, Arizona. A phoenix is a mythical bird creature engulfed by flames, something that would have been depicted as a red spirit who lurks in the skies. The crest which decorates the doors of my hometown also bear the inverted 33, as if it has to mean something. Oh, and can you guess what longitude our town lies on? Smack dab in the middle of the 33rd parallel. I know it all sounds crazy and probably like conspiratorial nonsense, for which there is no real basis at this point. I may have just overanalyzed the heck out of all of this, but I just can't help but feel there is something more to this. If you know anything about the Freemason philosophy, you'll know that numbers are of great importance. Nothing they do is coincidence. It is all supposed to mean something. What that is exactly, I don't know. In regards to the black-eyed children and everything else, I'm still not sure how it all connects. I still don't know what they want, how they can do things they do, or even what they actually are. I do know one thing though, they're still out there. Like I said at the beginning, I don't want to ruin anyone's fun. I know that many people absolutely love this time of the year, but I don't want to take that away from any of them. I just think it's important for you all to be aware of the things that are truly out there. So, when the big night comes and you're all dressed up as Clifford the Big Red Dog, or a sexy version of a spatula or something, just keep an eye out. There's gonna be a lot of trick-or-treaters out there that night, and some of them may have eyes that look a little too dark. Whatever you do, just do not let them inside your house. There's no telling how many there are now, or where they've gone, but I've got an odd feeling that we haven't seen the last of them. Stay safe out there. Candy, laughter, scares ghosts and ghouls. Halloween is easily my favorite holiday of the year. It has all the things that I love most in life. Sweets, costumes, and the excuse to be someone else even if just for a night. Where fiction and reality can intertwine without it being weird. I'm only 13, but it seems to me like a lot of people in my school want to pretend like they're too old to trick-or-treat or something. It's the cool thing now to go to Halloween parties and talk to girls or whatever they actually do. But for me, trick-or-treating will always hold a special place in my heart. Luckily, I had two friends who shared the same opinion on the matter, Carter and Aaron. I hadn't known them all too long, only since the beginning of this current school year. But the three of us had gotten along pretty quick, and decided that we would all go out on the best night of the year together. None of us had cell phones yet, so we planned the whole thing at school during our lunch period. I stood in the bathroom of my house, finishing painting on my fake blood that ran underneath my fangs. Wearing a cheaply made fabric cape and fangs, a little bit of makeup, and some contacts, and I was a full-on vampire. It was more effort than most people my age put into their costumes anyway. And Carter, who was definitely the biggest of us three, had chosen to go as a brute zombie. His clothes all tethered and ripped, while also having fake bits of blood and bone painted on his exposed skin. And then there was Aaron, who so desperately wanted to go as a swamp monster. We practically begged the guy to dress up as a werewolf and complete the classic monster trio, but he refused. Dude, you can't be serious. You look like you just jumped in a bucket of slime and then called it a day, Carter teased, snickering at Aaron as he revealed his look for the night to come. Come on, my mom spent 3 hours on this. I don't want to hear you complaining, Aaron fired back, rolling his eyes at Carter. 3 hours? Carter blares. Was she blindfolded the whole time? Alright, I'm gonna get a headache from you guys before this night even begins. Let's just go out, get some candy and have fun. I step in, continuing the work on my fake blood touch-up. I'm using a pillowcase, Aaron chimes in. I'm gonna fill this thing to the brim. A pillowcase? Carter replies quickly. I'm taking a freaking garbage bag. We discussed for a few minutes more, going on about the route that we would take and the types of candy that we wanted to score. I myself was more of a chocolate guru. Hershey's, Reese's, Snickers, Three Musketeers. I wanted it all. Carter and Aaron mostly agreed with me, with the exception of Carter constantly reminding me that sour candy reigns supreme, even over chocolate. But everyone has their preferences, I guess. His opinion was still wrong, though. The three of us finished the remaining little touches on our costumes, grabbing our various candy bags and whatnot, before finally walking out the front door to the house and setting off into the lively environment that was my street on Halloween. It wasn't actually dark quite yet, although the sun was beginning to dim as it set, leaving that perfect fall evening breeze to accompany the low light. Beautiful colored leaves blowing every which way. Our plan was to head over to the more upscaled and snobby part of town. Most people there would just leave out multiple bowls of full-size candy bars after a certain time, when they didn't feel like answering the door any longer, which was all the more fortunate for us. The only problem? Well, our area was poorly planned and structured quite strangely, meaning that the shortest way to get to said snobby area was to cut through a near mile-and-a-half long trail in the woods. People in my town always told urban legends and tales of creatures, ghouls, and cryptids lurking in the woods. They definitely freaked me out as a small child for sure, but I was now old enough to understand that it was all nothing more than fiction, that parents used to keep their young kids from running off and encountering something like a coyote. But you see, most legends and stories always portray the non-human creatures as the bad guys. All the time with next to no exceptions. That's where my town is different. Some claim to have seen creatures of the night throwing down like two drunk dads in a parking lot. The reasons they supposedly fight for are unknown. Territory, food, dominance, or just purely malice. All of them are not much more than one big conspiracy theory or tall tale. But what most people think is that while some of these beings are here to hunt, kill, and maim us, the others are here to watch over us, to protect us from the ones who only want to cause us harm and pain. As I said though, it's all nonsense. There were plenty of dangerous things in the woods without there being supernatural oddities and entities. Some people just like to amp it up for the sake of excitement and fun, which is entirely understandable. You'll blend right in, man, Carter announces before bumping Aaron. Well, you're not wrong, I interject, causing both Carter and I to snicker. Hey, you're the one who's going as a dang vampire. How creative. I'm pretty sure everyone and their mother thought of that one. Aaron snaps at me from behind. Well, except my costume is the best out of all of them, I deflect. I'm just saying that if we finish early, we should go scare some of the little kids around the neighborhood, Carter suggests with a proud smile. Yeah, and then have their angry dads chasing after us, I inquire rhetorically. Use your head, dude. That's part of the fun. Carter fires back without much flair. The three of us arrived at the entrance to the forest path, standing there as nothing more than ants while the massive trees towered over us. Bushes and all sorts of shrubbery making it nearly impossible to effectively see anywhere besides straight ahead, especially as it got darker and darker outside by the minute. Some of the trees were weirdly bent forward, almost like they were attempting to cover the path from any sunlight, a phenomenon that I didn't remember being present last year. I was a bit disappointed to see that someone had taken it upon themselves to TP the front few trees a bit. As to why or how it made any sense, I don't know, but it did get under my skin for some reason. Who the heck TPs a forest? Jeez, did a tornado run through here? Aaron says, breaking the silence between the three of us, as we stared ahead in a shared feeling of unsettling awe. What's with the toilet paper? Carter quizzed, taking one step forward. I don't know, I reply, genuinely confused. Let's just keep going. We want to be able to clean up the bowls before the other kids get there. This seems kind of sketch, not gonna lie, Aaron interjects. What was the point of TPing trees? Like I said, I huffed. I don't know. Now come on, let's go. The three of us continue forward, beginning the path and taking short but deliberate strides. We didn't let the strange unease ruin our excitement, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't on edge. As to why, well, that's the mystery. I didn't really have a legitimate reason. Toilet paper on trees isn't really enough to justify this sort of emotion. And although I've heard some horror stories of coyotes snatching up little kids, they were mostly cowards when it came to more normal-sized humans, and the three of us were big enough to where I was confident we wouldn't be bothered. Hey, so one question, Carter declares, for the both of you. Yeah, Aaron and I both reply simultaneously. You guys ever heard the story about the ground grabber? Pfft. Aaron immediately snorts in reverse, as if he were just blowing out a nose full of liquid. Yeah, I won't lie, that's a pretty stupid name, I chime in, failing to hold back a laugh of my own. Well, you won't think it's stupid when you find out what he did, said Carter with a straight face. My dad always told me that when he was a kid, he would always lurk in these very woods around town. Ooh, spooky, I tease sarcastically. But that still doesn't explain why it's supposed to scare us. But it does explain why it's failing. Well, maybe if you would stop interrupting me, I could keep going, Carter snaps. Anyway, they said he was a man who had been spliced with the DNA of multiple animals, mainly a groundhog. He was much taller and bigger than any man on the planet, strong and fast. My dad said people who messed with or disturbed the ground or natural areas like this, they would be hunted by him. He would follow them to their houses, to their place of work. No matter where they went, he would find them and eventually get them, and then take them back to his tunnels underground. Sometimes he would dig his way into the sewers and kill maintenance workers, and those that he didn't would find the corpses of large alligators in these sewers as well, torn apart by something powerful and vicious. Aren't alligators pretty rare in the state? Aaron interrupts. I've only ever heard of one instance of there being alligators up here. Also, why would he dig his way into the sewers? Sounds kinda stupid. Because he would be too big to fit in the manhole cover, you dope. Now, will you just have fun and enjoy the dang story? Jeez. What? I can't have fun and point out your stupid logic. The ground grabber isn't real, man. Your dad just didn't want you digging holes in the backyard with his shovels. Hey, come at me all you want, but all I'm gonna say is you better stay on the path. Don't litter and don't start digging holes, as you said. When the two of them finished their bickering, we were just about halfway through the trail. The sun getting lower and lower by the second as I watched squirrels and rabbits scatter into the thick brush of the trees. But as we walk along, Aaron suddenly freezes, looking down to his right at something that clearly disturbed him. I hold up a handed signal for Carter to hold up, attempting to get to the bottom of what it is that was bothering Aaron. Hey man, you alright? I approach, trying to focus my gaze on whatever he was so fixated on, failing to see what was holding him up at first. What the? Carter inquires, seemingly having spotted the same captivating sight before I had, leaving me curious as to what it was. But Aaron simply points a finger forward at the ground, just a few feet off the path, and I finally see what it is he was talking about. Just right next to the edge of the path, sticking out from a bush, was a shoe. It looked to be around a size 13, so I assumed it had belonged to a grown man. That in itself wasn't too strange. Loose shoes are more common than most people would realize. But what did get me was the thing next to it. Less than a foot to the right of the shoe was a jack-o'-lantern. Well, a lantern. It was turned on its side, a good chunk of its upper right area smashed to pieces, and embedding the remaining plastic into the ground. There was no blood and no corpse, or any sign that someone was hurt. Perhaps it was a prank or a decoration to scare kids who would cut through here. It wasn't like this was a secret route or anything. Plenty of people were aware of it. Okay, that's kind of weird, Aaron comments, taking a step back while keeping his eyes fixated on the bush. Dude, are you dumb? That's obviously just a decoration. Did you forget what night it is? Carter replies, although not sounding super confident about his claim. I'd probably just leave it alone, I say, keeping my feet right where they were. But Carter goes full throttle towards the bush, wanting to appear stronger in his conviction. Carter, would you just leave it alone? Aaron calls out, trying to pull him back, only causing Carter to thrash forward out of his grip. What are you guys even scared for? He teases further. Especially you, Garrett. He announces while pointing right at me. Aren't you always the one saying that monsters and ghosts are a bunch of BS? Frustrated, I fire back immediately. Well, duh. I never said it proved there's a freaking monster. Maybe it's the leftovers of a mugging. Don't tamper with potential evidence. Nerd. Carter shoots back bluntly. Hey, you're the weirdo who made up the stupid ground grabber. Sometimes it takes a lot of brain power to be stupid. I ramble, my eyebrows lowering. I think that's a paradox. Aaron interjects softly. Shut up, I erupt, turning my head to face him. Carter begins to laugh as he continues getting up close to the busted jack-o'-lantern, his loud chuckles echoing throughout the forest. But all of our bickering comes to a screeching halt when a blood-curdling roar booms from the trees off the path. It sounded like it came from deep within the woods, but simultaneously close enough to nearly shatter our eardrums right then and there. The sheer base of it was terrifying, as if a large grizzly had given everything it had to scare off a predator. As to what that predator would be, well, I'm no expert. Perhaps an even bigger grizzly. You guys heard that right? Carter whispers, as if he is afraid that someone or something will hear him. We did, and it's our cue to leave. Aaron snaps in a similarly quiet tone. That had to be a bear, right? I mean, they don't usually come this close to the neighborhoods, do they? Carter inquires, beginning to walk forward. We're leaving, I command. Now forget the lantern, forget the stupid shoe. We're going, come on. Okay, I know it's scary, but you guys are telling me that you don't want to see what that was all about, said Carter as he stands back up. No, because I'm not an idiot like you. Aaron begins before being suddenly cut off. A branch snaps not too far from behind the bush. None of us actually see the cause of it, but the sound is all too familiar. But it came off like it was a rather large one, far from a simple twig or a thin stick. The three of us decide that that was more than enough evidence for our case to leave and immediately take off, bolting down the path with all of our trick-or-treating gear in hand. I myself don't look back, but I could practically sense Carter turning his head multiple times to get a peek at whatever wild animal may or not had been on our tail. Although it was admittedly stupid to run, because if it had been a dangerous predator, we would have only invited it to chase us. We were behaving like prey. That was a bear. That was definitely a freaking bear. I don't care what either of you say, Carter declares with a not up for debate tone. Would you shut your mouth? I bark in an angry whisper. If he doesn't already hear our footsteps, he'll definitely hear your big mouth yapping. I see the opening to a road. Only about another 60 yards of running and we will be free from the clutches of these woods. I don't think I necessarily heard anything chasing us, thank God. But that didn't change this sense of impending doom going on in my head, as if we were on an inevitable path to our deaths. Regardless though, we do make it to the other side of the path. Granted, the three of us were wheezing and struggling to catch our breaths. It was still a far more desirable situation than being attacked by whatever bear or large predator was lurking in those trees. Just last week online, I read about some woman's husband getting taken by a bear. The three of us continued to stand at the end of the path hunched over, rapidly inhaling and exhaling as we attempt to regain our ability to keep going as normal. Let's just hurry up and start trick-or-treating, I say, continuing to huff and puff. What, and just go on like nothing happened? Somebody might have gotten eaten by a freaking bear. Aaron growls at me after standing upright. We don't know that, I countered, even doubting my own words as I speak. There wasn't any blood, guts, or anything that proves there was a stupid bear attack. That doesn't mean it didn't happen either, Carter adds. Okay, and what do we do? Go to the cops on Halloween night and tell them we maybe think somebody got eaten by a bear because there is a shoe and a broken lantern. They're gonna think that we're messing with them. Some kids trying to have fun wasting their time, I said angrily. Tell them about the roar, informs Aaron. Yeah, because I'm sure that would really help. Can we just forget it? It's not even that big of a deal. Seems like a big deal when you were the first one to bolt. Carter steps in. Jesus Christ, Carter, do you ever shut it? We haven't even started yet and you're already giving me a headache. I return furiously. I can't help but give Carter a hellish glare, staring him down like an angry mother would to her disobedient child. It was quickly becoming clear to me that perhaps our personalities weren't as compatible as I had previously assumed. At least not in the heat of stress, that is. I grip my candy bag and take a couple of steps forward, before looking back at my two distressed companions. I'm gonna go start getting some candy. You guys can sit here and continue to cry like babies about a stupid shoe and a lantern, or you can come with me, I pronounce softly. No, absolutely not. I'm going to the police station up the road, Aaron replies, putting his foot down firmly on the pavement. So, you're gonna walk another mile just for that? I implore with rhetorical intentions. Yep. Listen, that was sketchy stuff back there, but dude, I don't feel like walking to the station, Carter announces with hesitance, taking a few steps away from Aaron. Dude, what? Are you kidding? You're the one that wanted to play detective moron back there, getting your face all up in that bush so something could bite it off. Oh, but now by walking to the police station, it is out of the question for you. Figures. Quit being so lazy all the time. I could tell that Carter had an answer rising in his throat, but he stops himself, holding back whatever it was he was originally planning to say, in favor of not escalating this any further. I admired him for that, but I could tell it still hadn't done very much, as his substitute answer was arguably worse. Fine, if you want to go to the station that bad, then do it, but you'll be doing it by yourself. Aaron's eyes narrow, and with a long huff he turns and begins to walk away, letting us stare right at his back as he doesn't even turn to see if we were following him. Luckily, the police station was easier to get to from where we were at, so he wouldn't have to walk back through the path in the woods, just along the road. Even though the woods were still on one side of it, the left side, just to be specific. But you see, as cold as I pretended to be, I just couldn't leave him like that, walking by himself in the near pitch blackness of the now early nighttime sky, with only street lamps to light his path. Not many of the homes down the street to our right had their lights on. Like I said, most of them leave the candy bowls outside and just go to bed. But do you want to know what made it worse? What truly stopped my blood flow in its tracks? I caught a glimpse of a bit of bright light in my peripheral vision. It was coming from the dense trees in the forest right to the left of the road, only around a dozen feet or so from where Aaron was walking. He himself being unaware as he kept his eyes supposedly trained in the path directly in front of him. I turned my head only slightly, trying to focus in on whatever the light actually was. Coming to find it was a bit more elevated, like the source of it was high up in one of the trees. Once I begin to further comprehend, I see what was actually two lights, not just one, both of them in the shape of a light bulb that you would find in someone's house, and despite the fact that they appeared separate, I could tell they were both a part of one thing, one structure, one creature. Both of those yellow light bulbs move suddenly and simultaneously, staring down right at Aaron as he walks along and follows him ever so slightly. Whatever this thing was, it was precise and intelligent. That much was clear. I stand frozen, my instincts refusing to kick in. I don't see what the rest of this mystery creature looks like. The lack of light doesn't allow me. But all I know is that it was the furthest thing from both human and animal. All my doubts, all my skepticism, and all my conviction and logic were proven laughably wrong, right there in that short little insignificant moment. There I stood like a fool while the universe made me eat my own words. The two light bulbs only remain up from that specific tree for a few more seconds, before suddenly dashing backward deeper into the woods, bouncing along tree by tree before soon disappearing, soon leaving my line of sight as I stare dumbfounded, yet terrified. "Are you good, man?" Carter approaches, putting a hand on my shoulder and beginning to shake me. "You saw that, right? Please tell me that you just saw that," I exclaim, pointing my right index up at where I had laid eyes on the unsettling sight. "What are you talking about?" he asks, rather confused, an eyebrow in his face rising. "No, I know you had to have seen that, up in the trees." Carter narrows his eyes, making his best attempt to catch a glimpse at whatever it was I had spotted. But unsurprisingly, his expression stays static, finding no visual evidence of my claim. "Alright, if you're trying to be a jerk to get back at me, it's not funny, dude. Maybe we should go catch up with Aaron and convince him to." Carter begins before being swiftly cut off by yours truly. "Why would I do something like that? Did the past 10 minutes just not happen to you or something? I know what I saw. It was some sort of animal. An animal that shouldn't exist." "Dude, you're literally the one always saying stuff like that doesn't exist, remember? It's nothing but stories and nonsense. Things that people make up to make sure their kids act right." My jaw moves as I prepare to blurt out my response, but instead, I stop, letting out a slow, controlled exhale, my breath visible in the cool air of the night. I know I'm a non-believer or whatever you call it, and shouldn't that show you that I'm serious? I saw something in those trees. It was watching Aaron, and who knows if it's gonna follow him. Carter falls silent, having trouble finding the words to form his response. At this point, Aaron is out of sight, with the three of us being too young to have cell phones, as our parents put it. We had no way to reach him other than to go after him physically. And if that was our only choice, then that was just what we were gonna do. "Alright, enough. Let's go get him," I proclaim. "But we need to keep an eye on each other's backs. And once we get him, we're going home, end of story. You guys can stay at my place for the rest of the night." "As much as he gets on my nerves, fine. Let's go. I'm just saying that if he gets on my nerves, he's sleeping in the basement, period." When we set off, it had only been a few minutes or so since Aaron had begun his trek, but he had always been a fast walker. That, combined with the poor lighting of the road ahead, led me to be unsurprised that I couldn't see him. I was still on edge, walking to the right of Carter in order to be further away from the woods, even if the distance was terribly insignificant. I had gone from being the skeptic to the most paranoid and superstitious one of the group. Not that it was completely unprovoked by any means. Part of me wanted to rationalize it. Maybe someone was just messing with us the whole time. But that part with the light bulbs would be quite difficult to pull off, especially with amateur equipment. Carter and I get to where I had last seen Aaron before he had exited the circle of pavement lit up by one of the street lamps. We both glance around, seeing nothing in our field of view. The both of us progress further, the street becoming more isolated and empty the more distance that we cover. But even in the eerie silence, there was something that still caught my eye. An open manhole cover right in the middle of the road. "Carter," I announce weakly before motioning him over with my hand. I keep my eyes fixated on it, spotting no sort of safety equipment or sewer workers anywhere nearby. And it didn't look like it was opened very elegantly either. From what I've heard, they aren't very light. For one, there were scratches along the actual cover itself, and 3 parallel but also slightly jagged lines. It was also a few feet away from the edge of the entrance. I looked into the hole. Nothing but the complete darkness of the sewer staring back up at me. But you see, that in and of itself didn't really give us much cause for concern. What did, however, was a small piece of fabric also hanging from the street and dipping into the black pool of darkness leading to the sewer tunnel below. It wasn't any old piece of fabric though. The specific colors and patterns on it belonged to Aaron's swamp monster costume. A piece of fabric that looked like it had been forcefully torn right from the rest of his outfit. Panic set in not too long after. Carter attempted to be rational, playing it off as Aaron trying to get revenge on us. But that just wasn't the kind of person that he was. Not in a situation like this. It was honestly even foolish of him to bring it up, considering just how genuinely upset Aaron was only minutes ago. A sudden flashing of lights burst into our eyes from further down the road, getting brighter and more potent as they approach us. I hold my hand up in front of my eyes, the quick and drastic change in light causing me to blink rapidly. But the color scheme of said lights made it quite clear what the cause was. A police squad car. The vehicle rolls up next to both Carter and me, slowing down bit by bit as the front doors are level with the two of us. The passenger window slowly lowering and allowing me to see the officer inside, with a look of concern yet caution spread across his face. But Carter doesn't even pay the officer much mind, instead continuing to stare at the manhole and fabric, as if he was severely hypnotized. The officer rolls down his window, leaning towards the passenger side in order to verbally announce his presence. Hey there, boys. I hope you're out here having yourselves a good Halloween and whatnot, but what are you doing near that manhole? And why is it even open? I turn slowly, careful to look the officer in his eyes to convey the intensity of my conviction. Our friend, he's down there. Something took him. You've got to help us, call for backup or something. I know it sounds like BS, but there is something dangerous out here and it's hurting people. The officer's face lights up with what I can only assume was excitement, as if he was a James Bond fanatic who had just been offered some sort of elite espionage job. Well then, he chuckled before giving me an awkward wink, revealing a small portion of his teeth that were in desperate need of a long visit to the dentist. Don't worry, I'll play along. What are we hunting, Bigfoot? The creature from the Black Lagoon. Oh, I know. What about, Dracula? Yeah, Dracula, that's a good one. No, officer, you're not understanding. I shout frustratedly. This isn't a joke or a game. Our friend is really down there. The officer only smirks in response, further provoking my blood to boil inside of me. I can just feel that he is in no way believing me or taking my words seriously. But regardless, he parked his squad car in the grass and stepped out of the vehicle, marching over to where we were while shining a blinding flashlight forward. If he was only going to sit there and take this as a game, then I figured that him tagging along with us would be better than no help at all. Plus, without his flashlight, there is no way we would be able to traverse these sewers and find Aaron. Him also having a gun helped, but considering the level of intelligence he had demonstrated thus far, I wasn't very confident that he would know how to use it any more than either Carter or I would, and that's really saying something. The last thing I wanted to do was even think about going down in there, but I couldn't just leave Aaron behind like that. Every second we wasted or spent up here decreased his chances of surviving whatever the heck it was that had taken him. While I held out a hope that we would perhaps be able to find him alive, reality didn't seem too keen on being kind to people in these kinds of scenarios. Carter was furious once he had snapped out of his trance, prompting the officer to tell him to calm down and that He was playing his role a little too well. Once again, taking our genuine grief and worries as nothing more than what amounted to a joke. But as I said, we needed him. Regardless of his idiocy, he had the resources that we did not. And after what I had seen looking down at Aaron from the trees earlier, there was no way I was going to go down there without a baseball bat or a club or some sort of light source present. Just to be on the safe side, I tell the officer too that I'm going to reach over and grab a stick on the side of the road. He, of course, doesn't seem to care much, going as far as to chuckle and say the sentence, "And don't think no twig ever took down Dracula." Yeah, this was our help. What has the world come to in my short 13 years of existence? I think to myself. But I couldn't abandon Aaron. I couldn't just leave him behind. Every logical and survival instinct within was telling me this was a terrible idea. And of course it was. But who doesn't put themselves in danger when those they care about are in jeopardy? I haven't known him long, but time wasn't the only measure of a bond. Not to mention, I couldn't let him leave this earth with our final interactions with each other being unfiltered hostility. I had said earlier that our personalities might not be as compatible as we assumed, but that was no excuse to leave someone to die. The officer points his flashlight down to the manhole, verbally exaggerating his own personal fear, a fear that was nothing more than an insensitive act. "Alright boys, who's going first?" He smiles, oddly polite. "You!" I yell back immediately. "You seriously want 2 middle schoolers going down in there before you?" "Okay, partner, sheesh, don't have too much fun," he quipped. I looked around in desperation, searching for any passing trick-or-treaters, parents, or any source of help besides this guy. But the universe didn't seem to be feeling generous in that regard. All in all, I know what I should have done. I know that I should have tried much harder to find someone else, and to get the heck out of there. Knock on doors, ask to use a phone, something. The officer keeps a close eye on us while beginning to climb down the ladder, making me question his stance on how much of a joke he truly thought this was. Despite his outside appearance, there is a part of me that felt unnerved by his stare, like he was making sure that we weren't trying to get away. There's an uncomfortable silence as he descends. Carter and I lean down over the hole to watch in eerie awe. The darkness almost seems to swallow him up, the only thing stopping it being his flashlight, which he finally turned on once reaching the bottom of the ladder. This tunnel appeared quite large by sewer tunnel standards. From above, I wasn't able to get the full picture or grasp of its true size. But from what I could tell, the officer had at least 7 feet of space on either side of himself. I was well aware of police having some powerful flashlights, but this thing only barely put a dent in the black void that was the sewer tunnel. I can't help but hold my breath while Carter does the opposite. I was still willing to go down there for the sake of Aaron, and even though I was just a dumb middle schooler, I was still in tune with my survival instincts. If anything happened to the officer, if I heard so much as a yelp or whimper or gasp or see his eyes widen in terror, then all bets were off. But no, he seemed calm and collected, using his flashlight to scan both in front and behind him. "Oh yeah," he snickered. "This is definitely a monster hideout if I've ever seen one." "Wait, you're a policeman and you've never been in a sewer before?" questioned Carter. "I ain't no sanitation worker," the officer snaps back. He looks up at us from below, flashing Carter and I an awkward wink in an attempt to maintain his so-called character. "Would you just hurry up?" I demand, my anger seething as I watch this guy continuously look around like a lost child in a store. Carter goes for the ladder to start climbing, but I slightly push him out of the way, insisting that I go first. Seeing as I felt responsible for this all coming to pass in the first place, I dropped my empty candy bag to the side before beginning to descend. I climb down, with the officer at least doing me the favor of shining the flashlight so I can see what I'm doing as I descend. "Alright, Carter, come on. I say with a rushed tone, motioning for him to follow. But I don't have to tell him twice. He begins, climbing down the ladder with great haste and nearly slipping on the last couple of steps. I turn to look down the tunnel to our left, and along the walkway of concrete next to the stream of filthy sewage water sits yet another piece of errant swamp monster costume. A torn strip of it, several inches long and a couple of inches wide. The only different from the last piece, well, this time it had a coating of fresh blood on it. And just as I'm about to scream, to project my shock and existential terror, I feel something suddenly pressed itself against the back of my head. Something hard and metallic. And then a click. The two of you won't say another word. If you scream, well, then you can forget about ever getting to live as long as originally planned. Live bait is always more effective. I stand as still as stone, slowly raising my hands into the air as I spot Carter doing the same in my peripheral vision. The both of us as silent as can be. His voice wasn't much different, but he quickly dropped the whole intellectually inept act, opting for a more severe and threatening tone. I hear the officer, if you could still call him that, activate his walkie-talkie disguised as a typical police radio for the first time. He holds it in one hand, keeping his pistol trained on me with the other. This is Agent Owen. I've secured us a bait package. Subject 16A is out currently tracking the main target. Said he's having trouble picking up a scent. Need a status report on the rest of Team X0's location. There is no response at first, so the officer tries again, beginning to repeat his previous few sentences, before being interrupted by another male voice on the other end, one that sounded quite annoyed. Yeah, I hear you. Just give me a second, Jesus. My apologies, Director. He replies with a much weaker tone than before. But if only he knew that he would soon be given something to be much more sorry for. Because less than 100 feet down the tunnel, I spot a pair of glowing dots that suddenly pierce through the darkness. But not like the light, bulb-shaped ones from earlier, no. They were different. Other than obvious cosmetic contrast, they felt just as sinister, just as evil. I had no doubt in my mind that they were focused on us, staring us down like we were prey. They were a bright lime green, circular in their shape and held steady. Is that... I began, only being cut off by quickly rising fear levels. Every bone in my body feeling like it had turned into mush. My stomach churned. I felt just like a rabbit in the eyes of a fox. A powerful and low growl erupts from just below the dots, which themselves were placed just over 8 feet high, establishing the freakish size and scale of this mostly concealed and unseen entity. The officer, agent, mercenary, whatever he was, takes his pistol off the back of my head, his hands shaking as he points it into the occupied darkness. His breathing increases as his terror jumps to being on par with Carter and I's. Whatever training and conditioning he possessed all went out the window in that moment, displaying that he was just as scared and just as human as everyone else, revealing the true nature that he was a coward. Another growl emerges from the mysterious beast, but this one is far more unsettling than the first. It's acknowledgement of the fact that we were there. We were its goal and it had us just where it wanted us. How could it know? It wasn't supposed to be here, not yet. Agent Owen whispers under his breath, his bottom lip quivering as he does so. I pleaded with my brain to allow me to yell or scream. I don't know what this guy was talking about. Were him and his buddies hunting this thing? Why and for what purpose? What was really going on here? Owen steps forward, his hand still shaking and the gun with it, but only for mere seconds, because he suddenly stops, dropping to his knees and strangely staring ahead, as if he were hypnotized. A deer in headlights, as they say. His grip loosens on the weapon, it dropping onto the walkway and nearly falling into the flowing and putrid-smelling liquid sewage. but I don't hesitate to take advantage of the situation. I quickly lunge over and grab the gun without a second thought. Surprisingly enough, this doesn't seem to bother the agent. He appeared to not even care one bit. The hulking creature down the tunnel then lets out another earth-shaking exhale, its bass lower than the roar of an angry grizzly. It knew that it was in control, that it was the dominant one here, and there was next to nothing we could do about it. It would only be a matter of time before the inevitable took place. I motioned for Carter to begin climbing the ladder with me, careful not to be too loud and provoke the beast any further. But it seemed like that card was already off the table. I'm already halfway up the ladder with Carter just below me, as Agent Owen snaps out of his trance, realizing his now terrifying circumstances. He would definitely want his gun back, and there was no way that I would be able to physically keep it from him. He was a grown man, probably with special combat and self-defense training, meaning that I stood absolutely no chance. Carter and I quickly speed up our climb as the cryptid down the tunnel began to charge, his steps heavy, sounding as if they were smashing through the very concrete itself. He was snarling with nothing but pure rage as he made his way forward, and despite my lack of ability to actually see him, I know just who he was headed for. Agent Owen grabbed Carter and threw him off the ladder, latching onto the second-to-last step with his foot, only to be suddenly yanked right into the darkness of the tunnel by a massive, brown and hairy hand with fingers as big as most men's hands. He screams, a shriek of both terror and desperation. I can hear him trying to fight back against the beast, but it was pointless. All he could do was yell and plead for help, as he was ragdolled and dragged down the tunnel, traumatizing both Carter and I as his voice grew quieter and more insignificant. Carter gets back up onto the ladder, clearly traumatized by whatever it was that he saw. While I was above the chaos, he had been down there and more than likely got a decent look at the bulk of the creature. All I saw was a mere glimpse of what that thing actually was, but even that was enough to last me for the rest of my life. But Carter was a different story. I was worried that he might have fallen into the same trance the agent did just moments before his supposed death. But it was simply trauma manifesting itself in the moment. I wouldn't be surprised if he attempted to bleach his eyes when it was all said and done. My urgent yell for him to get back onto the ladder before whatever it was came back for us next. Carter had gotten lucky. In all this fear and panic, Owen had thrown him to the far side of the ladder, making him the closest one in the vicinity to grab it. I don't hear his cries any longer from down the tunnel. Either that thing had taken him far away or it had already gotten rid of him. Although both being true at the same time was highly plausible. I get to the top of the ladder, throwing myself over the edge and onto the pavement of the road. I was just lucky there were no cars coming at the time. I grab my empty candy bag once again, my hands shaking as I reach out for it. Carter soon joins me, the both of us taking admittedly more time than we should have to get off the road. But who could truly blame us? "What is this? What is this night?" Carter cries out, just before I see literal tears start to form in his eyes. What was down there?" I focus my gaze on him, fighting to hold back tears of my own. But regardless, I step closer to my severely distressed friend, throwing my arms around him for a tight but brief hug. We were truly on our own now. No friends and no family to help. Not without a way to contact them at least. We couldn't even trust the police anymore. Who knows how many more of them were disguised as one of those agents. Carter and I break away from the hug with him, still understandably trembling. All I could think of was to walk with Carter home and let him crash at my place for the night. I felt not only wrong but strange to walk away from where it had all happened. Believe me, it was hard to accept the difficult truth. Aaron had suffered the same horrific fate as the agent. the only difference being that one of them actually deserved it. I contemplated telling one of our parents, but our entire story sounded like nothing more than a legend cooked up by some kids to get attention. But at the very least, we would have to tell Aaron's parents that he went missing, that we got split up and that we couldn't find him. It was the only plausible thing that I could think of. I would have to stand there and lie, all because the truth would only make me seem like I was nothing more than a callous teenage prankster. Carter and I would have to take the long way back. No way we were going to dare cutting back through the woods, not after everything that had happened tonight. Although we would still be walking next to the woods, it wasn't nearly as risky. I had no problem hogging up the bike lane on the road if it meant that we wouldn't meet a horrific fate. "You need anything, man?" I inquired, turning to Carter, who refused to make eye contact at the time. A few trick-or-treaters passed us by, concerned expressions on their faces. One even attempted to approach us before I waved him off. If he only knew what can of worms he would be opening by getting involved with us. "Can you be the one to tell his parents?" he responds, his voice hoarse and sour in its sound. I try to respond, but he cuts me off, deciding last minute to add in another bit of commentary. The thing in the sewer. What did it do to him? What did it do? Does it want me too? The way that it looked at me, I think it was hungry. I didn't dare bother asking him the specifics of the creature's appearance. Now was just not the time. Even despite my burning curiosity to know what we were truly up against. "You're gonna be okay, man. We'll get through this. I promise that we will. But right now, let's just get home, okay?" As we walked along, I had realized that I still possessed the handgun the now deceased agent had dropped. Earlier, I was careful to go ahead and put it in my candy bag for fear of someone seeing it. Being a 13-year-old who's grown up with a mostly sheltered life, I had no previous experience with handling a firearm of any sort. So having one in my possession did have me a bit on edge. But as my dad always said, never treat it like a toy and you'll be fine. I couldn't help but feel as if we had been followed, that something or someone was watching us. And now that I truly thought about it, I wasn't regretting getting out of there as quickly as possible. That agent's co-workers would be arriving soon, as he had called them on his radio, and they're probably suspicious after not hearing from him for the past several minutes. What other institutions had they infiltrated or gotten into? The FBI, the CIA, who knows what they truly had control of? All I knew is that, from that day forward, I lost any bit of trust in authority. They more than likely had eyes and ears everywhere, and as technology develops, their reach can only expand. I could have sworn that something had been moving underneath my feet as Carter and I continued down the road. Now having trees on either side of us, we had gotten out of the main residential area of the upper-class neighborhood, and as a result, were once again trapped in an eerie silence, without the strangely comforting sounds of trick-or-treaters anywhere nearby. Once again the feeling of something moving beneath my feet popped up. I can't help but walk as if I were stepping on hot pavement, wanting to keep my feet off the asphalt of the road for as long as I could. Now while I looked a bit awkward as I did so, Carter would have usually gotten a kick out of something like this, but he was in no mood to laugh. The furthest thing from it. It still wasn't his fault though. But when I shifted my eyes just to check on him, I realized the second reason as to why he wasn't laughing. Because he too was doing the same thing, raising his feet up higher and creating more distance in between each of his steps along the road, coming off like someone in a marching band. You feel that too?" I urge Carter, to which he follows up by responding with a simple nod. A terrible sinking feeling emerged in my stomach, like when you suddenly feel yourself falling from a great height in a dream, only to snap awake at the last second before impacting the ground. I look up ahead on the empty road. It wasn't nearly as thin and vulnerable as the trail in the forest that we had gone through earlier, but at this point, it didn't feel much better. I felt just as exposed and as much like a prey item. But it was either this or directly through the woods themselves, on a much smaller, thinner trail. At least this way, it would be harder for anything to ambush us, without being seen on either side of the road and each tree line. And yet through all of that, a sight that both brought me grand relief and awful dread emerged from far down the road. The headlights of my dad's truck. They go bright as he cruises down the empty street, slowly heading towards us. I already know that he would be furious, but I would much rather deal with him than whatever was out there lurking in the shadows. And from everything that had gone down so far, this Halloween night had demonstrated that getting grounded was far better than getting eaten or taken by things that shouldn't even exist. Carter and I can only watch as he slows the vehicle, coming to a complete stop and rolling down his window before sticking his head out, with an intense and resentful glare. I try to speak, to tell him that we needed to get out of there as quickly as we could, but he holds a finger up, not in the mood to hear whatever it was that I had to say, to try and justify my disobedience. Get in the car and shut your mouth. I told you not to be coming over here, boy. You're done when we get home. I go quiet. Carter makes an effort to speak up for me once he saw that I was in no position to make any demands. Aaron's gone. We don't know where he is right now. He just got mad and stormed off on the two of us, sir. He lies, his tone unsure and underconfident. Dad stops, raising an eyebrow and looking in between us once again. His steaming expression now joined by one of uncertainty. Although it did next to nothing to actually calm him down, I made a conscious effort to hide the bulge of the gun sitting in my candy bag, praying the dark would obscure my dad's ability to see it. Where the heck did you see him last? Did you call the police, tell the boy's parents, something? We don't have phones, Dad, I began, only to trail off when I looked to the left and spot the last thing that I wanted to see on this night. Those yellow light bulbs. They sat about 50 meters deep into the tree line and around 8 feet off the ground. This creature had to be just as tall, if not even more so than the thing in the sewers. Was it following us? Had it been watching us this entire time, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike? As if having to worry about one unnatural creature wasn't bad enough. Spit it out, Dad bellows, snapping me out of my fixed stare on those eyes. I, of course, try to point and nudge my dad to look at them too, but he was far too focused on Carter and I. We don't know what happened. We were planning on telling his parents, I swear, Dad, I shout back, careful to correct my tone afterward. My dad refuses to reply, instead opting to motion Carter and I into the truck as he had done minutes earlier. But I wasn't arguing. Being out here was nothing more than a risk of being in unknowable levels of danger. We're going to the police station to file a missing people's report for your friend. I don't want to hear any ifs, ands, or buts about it, Dad growled as I sat down in the passenger seat, while Carter hesitantly put his seatbelt on in the back. No, Dad, we can't go to the police, I foolishly protest. How would I make this argument sound logical without the full truth? Either way, I was going to come off as insane. I said no objections, he snaps, aggressively gripping the steering wheel while beginning to turn around. You don't understand. The police, we can't trust them. These people, they... Not another word, Garrett, he shouts, putting his foot on the accelerator after we had fully turned around. We drive down the road, Carter tearing up once again and choking back the need to cry. I look back at him, sympathetically begging for him to hold it in, just for now at least, just until we were out of this car. Do you know how worried your mom and I were? There's a reason we tell you not to walk through those woods. You could have been snatched up by some weirdo, or made dinner by a bear that was looking for a meal. Dad, please just listen. Please, I'm trying to tell you that we cannot go to the police. We can't, Dad cuts me off by suddenly slamming his foot on the brake pedal, yelling his lungs out in a panicked burst of adrenaline, as something in front of the car supposedly caught him completely off guard. I dart my eyes to the windshield, morbidly curious to see whatever it was that had grabbed hold of his attention so abruptly. And whatever it was enough to leave him sitting there, speechless, terrified even. And not many things scared my dad nowadays. After years of hunting dangerous animals and competing in combat sports when he was younger, he had been more than a little hardened. But it soon became clear what he was so worked up about, because his shock and unfiltered look of horror was nothing in comparison to both mine and Carter's. First off, we had come to the end of the street, just only around 100 feet from being able to turn onto one of the main roads and get out of this more isolated route. We were little over a mile away from the neighborhood that Dad had picked us up in. We were actually a decent distance from pretty much anyone, but nothing remote by any means. Up ahead was where the three-way intersection for us to turn on was located, and it was still there. I know it was, and usually we would see it immediately. But it's hard to do so when there's a nearly 12-foot tall mound of dirt sitting right at the end of the road, stretching all the way across the entire 25-foot width of the street, meaning our path forward was completely cut off. However, that wasn't the thing that truly made my dad look like his heart was gonna stop. In front of the dirt sat an obviously large pit, its depth at least 12 feet, but something told me that was far from accurate. Everything was quiet, not peaceful but chillingly silent. Nothing but the sound of the truck's engines among the audio deprivation of the night. How had this pit been dug so fast? Clearly, this wasn't the work of any human machinery or engineering. You see, I don't know what was truly worse, the unsettling silence or the deep and pained groaning coming from the pit, as if a lonely old man was taking his final few long and drawn-out breaths. No family or friends around to comfort him. The groans slowly grow louder as my dad begins to snap out of its trance of terror, his look of horror transforming into one of seething rage, even more so than before, which was definitely saying something. "These dang kids and their stupid Halloween pranks," he hollers, shaking a fist at the windshield before sticking his head out of the window. "Hey, you idiots think it's funny to block the road. How many of you hooligans did it take to dig this so quick, huh?" "We should turn around," Carter suggested rather weakly, he himself just as unsure as I was when it came to figuring out what to tell Dad. No laughs, giggles, or any chuckles of mischief made themselves known. Only more of the groaning. The same groaning that only became more clear and audible as the source moved closer to the top of the pit. Speaking of which, the sound which I had originally perceived as only one deeply raspy groan had split into two distinct noises of their own. The original one possessing a bit more bass while having a scratchy element to it, the other being a bit lighter, as if coming from a sleepy child. I felt myself slightly jolt to my seat as a severely disfigured human hand emerges over the edge of the pit, the fingers of which embed themselves into the concrete, cracking the pavement and splitting chunks of it as cracks were sent up to even the car. Whoever this hand belonged to would definitely seen better days. Bits of flesh torn from the wrist and palm, while dirt and even what appeared to be a certain type of weed or plant was growing in the webbing between the ring and the pinky finger. "We're leaving now," Dad declared with not even a sliver of hesitance. He immediately puts the truck into reverse, backing up and shifting the vehicle in order to do a full turnaround. I can only sit there shaking and shivering like a mouse whose hole had been discovered in someone's home. Perspiration emerging on my forehead, as I felt my hands involuntarily reached for something to grip onto. The truck sat perpendicular on the street as my dad prepared to do a hard left and get us the heck out of there. My passenger side window faced the pit, allowing me to see the not one, but two entities emerging from it. On the left stood a man now fully revealed and on his feet, if you could even still call him a man anyway. The horrific process or ritual his body had gone through surely took his humanity away from him. He was dressed in somewhat casual clothing that was mostly torn and battered from all the damage he had seemingly sustained. If you recall me earlier describing the wounds and natural growth stemming from his hand, well, that same description also applied to the rest of his body. His face, an exposed part of chest, shoulders and legs were all covered in raw and disgusting tears of the skin. Dirt also forming around his various body parts and one of his eyeballs, even had a maple leaf growing out of it. Even pieces of his eyes and inner fleshy worklings spread around it. The man's appearance was body horror at its most extreme. This was not the work of just some makeup or elaborate Halloween costume design. It was definitely real. Oh, so horrifically real. And here we were, caught up right in the middle of this living nightmare. It was a gross understatement to say I was inches away from vomiting onto my own lap right then and there. To see someone so bad and utterly destroyed was not something that I thought I would ever have to experience, especially at this age. And yet, despite all of the grotesque and disturbing features, there was one that stood out the most to me, one that wasn't very unusual at all in the grand scheme of things. The man was only wearing one shoe, or what was left of it, the front part torn open and exposing his toes that had bits of grass growing out from underneath both of the big and middle toenails. But I could make out the branding and design of the remnants of the shoe itself. The general size, the color scheme, and logos matching that of the shoe Aaron, Carter, and I had all found while cutting through the woods earlier on. The shoe that had been right next to the smashed up jack-o'-lantern lamp. The only thing that could be worse than seeing the victim of a tragedy that I could have prevented was the figure standing next to him. Someone who I thought I would never see again. Aaron. He was in a much less transformed state, but that still didn't change the fact that his hair was turning shamrock green. The flesh on his arms had changed into a texture and color similar to that of tree bark. His eyes were lifeless, nothing but two snow-white abysses that stared straight into my soul. I could tell that he was too far gone, no longer the person I knew him as. And it was all my fault. Everything that he was and had become was the result of my foolishness and inaction. It was like having my biggest and most grave mistake staring right at me, tormenting me for my moronic behavior. "No, God, no," I mutter, my bottom lip quivering in both despair and adrenaline. Even my shock was minuscule in comparison to Carter's. He simply sat in the back repeating the phrase, "This is just a bad dream," as Dad practically yanked the steering wheel for us to turn left. The truck makes a sharp shift to the left, shooting down the road and back down the way that we had came, Dad wasting no time in putting the accelerator pedal right to the floor. "What is this? What is this night?" Carter cries out from the back seat. "We just need to leave. We need to take care of ourselves. Whatever that was, we ain't gonna be seeing it much longer. I'm gonna get us out of this mess, I promise," Dad assures the both of us. He couldn't just drive around the dirt. The tree line was far too thick on both sides. We would end up crashing in, allowing whatever those two had turned into to get to us with no chance of escape. We continue flying down the street, whipping right past all the trees and bushes on either side of the road. I could see both Aaron and the man quickly becoming smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror, giving me great but only brief relief. We hadn't gone far, less than a quarter of a mile or so, yet I thought that would be it. I thought that would be the end of this nightmare. And it definitely seemed like that. That is until my dad slammed on the brakes once again, this time resulting in a much more disastrous outcome. "Jesus," he curses, rapidly turning and jerking the steering wheel while trying to desperately come to a stop. The truck suddenly and violently turns to the side and skids, our seatbelts being the only thing keeping us all from suffering horrible head and bodily injuries. But that still didn't stop my shoulder from slamming up into the window as the vehicle collides with the structure my dad had failed to avoid. I can practically feel the bruise forming as I grit my teeth and groan as a result of the following pain. From what I could tell, Carter was just on the edge of passing out from all the psychological stress he had endured up to this point. My dad, on the other hand, his angry, confident facade had now completely faded, instead being replaced by existential dread. I had never seen him like this before, not even in our darkest times as a family. The truck suddenly shifts, as if it's about to be tipped over. I look outside to see that we were halfway inside of another identical ditch to the one just a few hundred feet away, blocking this end of the road as well, with another behemoth wall of dirt sitting right behind it. We were trapped. "Stop, stop, don't move," I scream with a desperate pitch, holding both my hands up to Carter and Dad. But even such a gesture like that causes the truck to move once again, slightly tipping to the right and almost falling into the pit below. Dad attempts to go forward and then turn left, but it does little to help the overall predicament. So I do everything I can to shift my mass to the left, going against my previous conviction. I tell Carter to do the same, to which he obeys after a bit of rapid blinking, quickly moving over in the back seats once he fully regains his consciousness. It surprisingly seems to work. The truck's tilting slows and becomes much more gradual, gaining more traction on where the road had been cut off. Us slamming into a section of the dirt actually ended up being a blessing in disguise, as some of it had slid forward into the depth of the pit and allowed the truck to be pushed further left and thus away from the edge of the pit. "Out, now!" Dad commands the both of us, opening his door and snarling at Carter to do the same. I climb across these seats like a startled raccoon, nearly hitting my chin on the steering wheel as I pull myself out of the vehicle. I take great care to grab the candy bag and retrieve the gun from it, as I felt it would be needed sooner than I had hoped. I was planning on handing it to my dad if it really came down to it. Once again, there were far too many trees and shrubbery for us to drive around the mound of dirt, so we had no choice but to get out of there on foot. We begin to run, abandoning the very vehicle my dad had owned for nearly 2 decades. It was practically one of his children, but in this moment of life and death stakes, it was nothing to him. The three of us round the corner of the dirt mound, Dad beginning to wheeze only a few meters into the sprint. His age had certainly caught up with him, and despite all of his physical activity and fitness training in his younger years, his knack for smoking a pack a day in recent years wasn't doing him any favors. But the three of us were all suddenly stopped right in our tracks, as the truck had been suddenly and violently launched right in front of us, smashing right into the trunk of a tree and causing the engine to be immediately destroyed, smoke rising from the disfigured and banged up hood. I stumble and fall backward, the ear-shattering sound of the collision causing me to complain in a wave of painful ringing, only for it to be amplified when it was followed by a deep, triumphant guttural roar, a roar with a magnitude so great it threatened to throw the trees around us right from their roots. Carter, Dad, and I all look over to the right. All of our eyes go wide as we backed up. It took me a second to get back to my feet and grab the candy bag wrapped around the gun, my initial instinct being to freeze and then bolt. The beast. It was the creature from the sewers, the one that had taken both Aaron and Agent Owen. How did I know? Well, I recognized those eyes. Those bright green, piercing, sinister eyes. the ones that had sent Agent Owen into a trance in the tunnel, and there was a good chance that I would be next. The beast was as tall as I had previously predicted. Somewhere in the 8-foot range, he was bipedal, standing upon 2 massive webbed feet. His basic body structure resembled that of a human, with 4 limbs if you didn't count his neck and head, but he was the furthest thing from any Homo sapien that I knew. He was extremely bulky, looking as if he could have been Hulk Hogan's big brother. His skin wasn't skin at all, at least, not in the left half of his body, which was covered in chocolate brown fur, like that of a beaver. The fur in his left half ran from head to toe. Even his so-called fingers were covered in it. His face was an amalgamation of what looked to be multiple different animals. His nose was long, sticking at least a few inches out from his body, from between those green, glowing eyes. His mouth was in the shape of a rectangle, filled to the brim with jagged teeth as sharp as surgical knives. On top of that were 2 long, slimy and discolored tongues emerging from opposite sides of his jaws, both of them dripping with whatever bacteria-induced fluid this thing probably called saliva.
Which one of you shall I start with first?
The beast inquires proudly in his chilling voice. Its bass like that of a large drum, along with being scratchy and somewhat distorted, as if 2 of him were speaking at once, creating an echo effect. I suddenly feel a strange texture grip itself onto my back and shoulders. Something had both grabbed and restrained me, causing me to drop the bag and letting the gun fall out. The same could be said for Carter minus the gun part. He had his arms forcefully put behind his back by the transformed version of Aaron, who appeared to possess great strength, while Carter was definitely much larger than him when he was still a normal kid. But this version of Aaron had no struggle at all with keeping him where he wanted him. Whatever the ground grabber had transformed him into, it was clear he retained no shred of his former humanity. And yet despite all of this, Dad was still free. Speaking of which, he took the opportunity to dive for the gun that had dropped, causing an outcry from me, having a bad feeling that it wouldn't end well. "Dad, don't!" I shout, attempting to wriggle myself out of the grasp of the transformed man. The weeds growing from his hands uncomfortably brushing up against my forearms as he held my arms behind my back.
"I don't know what corner of hell you crawled out of,"
Dad shouts in a futile attempt to be assertive with this massive entity,
"but you're going back."
He holds up the weapon, pointing the barrel right at the head of the monster, and fires 2 different shots just as the beast raises its right hand. The rounds tearing through his flesh and going just below his knuckles, and causing him to roar out in pain. A small but still present bit of graphite black blood dripping from the new tiny holes within the creature's hand. "Stop! Just stop!" Carter shouts, that desperation in his eyes from earlier now reappearing. But my dad continues to shoot, up until the beast retaliates against the assault, spreading his fingers apart and proceeding to pull his arm back before coming down with the backhand against Dad. The hit collides, sending his body flying over a dozen feet before violently slamming into a tree. Nothing but the sounds of his bones shattering and his joints being turned into mush, as the flesh on his back peeled away, as what remained of his corpse fell off the trunk of the tree. And even through all of that, the gun itself was unharmed. As much as I didn't want to accept it in the slightest, I knew there was no way he could have survived such a powerful blow. I could only watch as he finished peeling away from the tree, his skin and tissue stuck between both his back and the trunk while he fell forward onto the ground just in front of it. It had a similar visual outcome to that of peeling one piece of bread away from a freshly made grilled cheese sandwich. But he barely had time to scream or make any auditory expressions of his pain. The sheer physical force and trauma of the hit, killing him near instantly. "Dad!" I howled like a dying dog, tears forming in my eyes. If I hadn't still been restrained, I would have fallen to my knees right then and there. left to lay on the ground as I screamed in agony from the fresh wound of seeing this monstrosity brutally take out my own father in front of me. And the worst of it all, I had no time to cry, to mourn, or to process the heart-shattering reality of what had just taken place. And as the creature moved toward me, I assumed I would be joining my dad in sharing his fate very soon.
In the tunnels, weren't you?
The ground grabber growls as I strain my neck to look up at his hulking figure, his smile awkward due to the almost alien shape of his mouth.
I'm grateful I saved you two for last. You will both make fine additions to my lineup. Far better and more intelligent than the ones covered in the pine.
He shows off his jagged teeth as his smile widens, slowly reaching out to me with his hairy hand. This is it, I thought. This right here would be the end of me, the end of my short 13-year life. Every achievement, failure, and lesson I learned would ultimately be worthless, as death was coming right for me, and I was powerless to stop it. And it was until more gunfire suddenly erupted from further down the street. It was louder and far more rapid in nature. It was definitely more than just one bullet flying at a time. These shots had to be coming from something automatic, far more powerful than the pistol I had retrieved from Agent Owen. The beast suddenly pulls his hand and arm away, roaring in agony as a few of the bullets managed to land within his forearm. I dart my eyes to the right, spotting a group of 4 heavily armed and geared up men and women. They were covered shoulder to toe in black body armor, firm boots on their feet, and advanced-looking visors over their eyes. In their hands, they held heavily loaded assault rifles, long magazines sticking out from the bottom and high-tech scopes on the tops. They looked like soldiers, nothing that I've seen from the United States military, unless they got an outfit change. But something told me otherwise, and I just couldn't put my finger on it. One of the men and one of the women stopped to reload their weapon, as the other two opened fire on the ground grubber. He quickly dashes backward in the fury of bullets flying near him, picking up Dad's damaged truck and holding it up in front of him as a sort of shield. But even then, it only just about does its job. The bullets effortlessly tear through the metal of the vehicle. These rounds were dangerously powerful and made the handgun look like a water pistol. So instead, the ground grabber takes a different approach, pulling the truck back and launching it at the 4 agents as they continue to fire on him, causing all of them to either yell, quickly move out of the way, or both. I was expecting to see blood, to hear the sounds of bones being crushed by 4,000 pounds of damaged metal, and to hear the agonized screams of the unfortunate target that it had hit. But the thing is, the pickup truck never landed. It never hit anyone. I kept my eyes closed in order to avoid actually looking at the result, but no sound of the impact ever came, because it was caught en route. "Hold your fire," one of the agents commands the others, as they all look up at their unlikely savior. I thought my eyes were deceiving me, that everything that had happened throughout this night was nothing more than a product of a nightmare. I wanted to wake up, to be able to hold my dad and go to school as usual. But no, the universe was not that kind. I get a good look at the creature who had caught the truck and saved those agents from certain doom. And once again, the reality of it all hits me like a buzz, on top of the million emotions running through my brain. Everything from crippling grief to seething anger. He was inhumanly tall on 2 legs, reaching the 8 feet mark just like the ground grabber, but they greatly differed in bulk. While the ground grabber possessed biceps that would make the Incredible Hulk himself blush, this being was rather skinny, with not much muscle mass to be seen. And yet it didn't hold him back whatever so in the strength department. His skin was hairless and a midnight blue shade. He almost blended in with the night. But those eyes, oh, I recognized those eyes. 2 glowing yellow light bulbs sitting right on the front of his face, above the mouth filled with freakishly sharp teeth. But he didn't show his with a sinister grin. Rather, he gritted them together in a face that screamed he was more than pissed off. He held the vehicle with both his hands, hands that were outfitted with chillingly long fingernails. Fingernails that not only had a bit of dried blood in them, but also pierced the very metal of the truck that he was holding.
Finally, what were you doing out in the dang woods, freak?
One of the agents standing behind him grills rather forcefully, showing next to no gratitude for what the creature had done to save his life.
There were others,
the tall blue figure responds, as he tosses the truck over to the side and into the tree line, not even looking back at the agent as he says it. I feel the deformed man tighten his grip around me, Aaron doing the same on Carter, causing the both of us to whimper before Carter yells out,
"Whoever you guys are, just please kill these things already."
And just as he finishes his outburst, another figure crawls out from the pit nearest to us. Once again, the entity definitely had remnants of being human, but the skin on its hand was torn, ripped, and messily stripped off. Its arm was even worse, with dirt falling from some of the open wounds and plants growing out of the remaining bits of intact flesh. But as I see the torn fabric in a dark blue color covering some of the upper forearm and above, I begin to quickly realize who this was, or who they once were. Agent Owen. He effortlessly leaps over the edge of the pit, landing firmly on his feet in the road. There's a silence, with the neighborhood and closest people being about a mile away. It seemed like help was not coming anytime soon. But I'm not sure what anyone besides the military or a freaking SWAT team would do in this situation regardless. Agent Owen's fake police officer outfit had been ripped to shreds. His face was so dead, monstrous even. He immediately glanced at the ground grabber with his now sunken eyes, a sinister look of acknowledgement, as if he were about to take great pleasure in what was soon to happen.
"Owen, what did he do to you?"
An agent desperately inquires from behind the tall blue beast.
"Oh my God,"
another adds, lowering her weapon in disbelief. The ground grabber then waves his left hand, signaling for Owen to go forward. He of course obeys, beginning to charge at his former comrades in an inhumanly fast sprint, closing the few dozen feet of distance in seconds. When he was still alive, I heard him say something about Subject 16A on his radio. The blue creature. He must have been it. The ground grabber then signals for Aaron and the one-shoe man to come forward and join Agent Owen in his attack on the agents, making his control over them clearer. The agents scatter and begin to fire their weapons, as I feel the grip on my arms completely loosen, both me and Carter now free to move as we please. The ground grabber and 16A both begin to run at each other, with 16A oddly dropping down in a quadrupedal fashion and charging forward on all fours. And despite his seemingly bipedal body and bone structure, he appeared to somehow traverse the distance even faster when moving in this particular fashion. The gunfire from the agents continue as Aaron, the one-shoe man, and Agent Owen all converge on them, dashing to the sides, jumping into the air, and doing everything in their power to be as elusive and hard to hit as possible. And unlike the ground grabber, the few bullets that did hit them did not cause them any physical pain, despite Aaron having one of his fingers shot right off. They did damage, but it wasn't slowing them down at the same time. I assume they probably required a headshot to die, and if that was the case, it would be extremely difficult to put them down due to their rapid, elusive, and well-thought-out movements. Once 16A and the ground grabber are within around 10 feet of each other, 16A jumps off the ground and pounces onto the front of his bulky opponent, only for this move to backfire as the ground grabber wraps his arms around 16A's back and proceeds to body slam him right into the road, cracking the pavement as a result. 16A fires back by lifting the ground grabber off himself and throwing him to the side, the grabber colliding with my dad's destroyed pickup truck and bending the metal as he does so. I turn my head away from the spectacle of these two massive-sized titans duking it out, and over in the direction of my dad's body. Nothing could have prepared me for the aftermath of the ground grabbers attacking him. I had watched plenty of horror films, many of them being movies about zombies. I had seen plenty of fake and scripted stuff in my short life at the time, and it never truly had bothered me. But seeing it in person was a far different story. For one, it was the body of my own father, the man who had raised me, clothed me, fed me, and bathed me. The man who I had spent hours with up late at night with conversations about where my life would go, and how he would be there to support me along the way. My first house, my first car, my first girlfriend. He always told me that he would be there for all of it. But it was all gone now. All those potential moments lapsed in time to strengthen the bond between father and son, just wiped from the face of the earth. I wanted him to die old in his bed with me, my mother and my older brother standing next to him. He deserved to leave this earth at peace, surrounded by his loved ones. But no, instead he was killed by a hideous, disgusting monster. I darted my eyes between both the remains of my dad and the gun, my heartbreak forming into a boiling pot of rage, deep-seated anger at this thing that had taken him from me.
What are you doing, man? We gotta go.
Carter howls, yanking me by the arm, barking at me repeatedly to get my butt moving and get out of there. The gunfire from the agents still continues as they attempt to kill their dangerously quick assailants. Subject 16A and the ground grabber continue their scrap not too far away. 16A quickly running up a tree on all fours, and then proceeding to pounce down on the ground grabber from above, violently tackling him before lifting him up and slamming him clean through the trunk of one of the trees. He goes in for another attack, swinging with his right hand and slashing the ground grabber with his right claw along the left half of his body, drawing that grotesquely colored blood as a result, and causing the now further wounded beast to throw an uncoordinated blow to 16A's chest as he wailed from the sting of the laceration. The resulting punch launching 16A several feet backward before he too collides with the tree trunk. But I look away and back at the gun as Carter continues to practically holler at me like a banshee.
Let us go. Come on, man. We have to get out of here or we'll die. I can't let another friend of mine die.
I didn't respond, not verbally anyway. I can't muster up the emotional strength to speak to another human being. The only emotion on my mind was vengeance. With tears forming in my eyes, I reached down and picked the gun up, doing everything I can to avoid looking at all the peeled and raw flesh on the back of my dad. The pistol feels lighter in my hand than the first time that I held it, probably due to the intense rush of adrenaline that was flowing through me. I felt every possible emotion at once, but it was all driving me to point the weapon right at the ground grabber as he and 16A continued their scrap. The agents far behind, still on the road, were yet again having trouble hitting the grabber's disciples. Transformed Aaron even got within a dangerously close distance of one of the agents without being shot in the head, taking advantage of the golden opportunity as she had ran out of bullets and attempted to quickly reload a rifle, jumping up and biting her right in the jugular. Even through the body armor she was wearing, his rotted teeth sank deep into the woman's flesh as she cried out with her gurgled scream, just before Aaron pulled back with his jaw still clamped down and ripped all the inner workings from her throat right out. A spray of red followed as she collapsed, no longer able to scream as Aaron stood above her dying figure and spit whatever was left within his mouth out. In his expression, there was not a single bit of regret or sympathy for what he had just done. Fresh blood and strips of flesh staining his disfigured lips. The agent to her left, however, gets grabbed by the former agent Owen, his hand wrapping around his throat and lifting him into the air, before throwing him several feet backward, displaying his newly inhuman strength.
I feel complete,
he announces as he walks toward his former comrade.
You should let him take you. It's better in the end.
He follows up, curling his lips into a sinister grin. Go to hell. This ain't the Owen that I know. I know you're still in there and you can fight it, but I've got a job to do. The agent replies with a violent cough, just before I see him reach into his utility belt and retrieve a grenade. Owen pounces on him, presumably to tear him limb from limb. But the agent was rather smart and resourceful. He held his grenade firmly in his hand just after pulling the pin off. Owen completes his leap, now landing on top of the man and lunging downward with his mouth wide open and deformed teeth bared. It was clear that he was going to meet the same fate as his female colleague, at least until he shoved his hand inside Owen's mouth, the same hand holding the soon-to-explode grenade. The agent let out a blood-curdling shriek as Owen clamped down on his hand, presumably disconnecting his fingers from their appropriate tendons and muscles. The sounds of bones crunching even being heard in between sections of gunfire and cries of desperation, as well as the roaring and snarling of both the ground grabber and subject 16A. But the grenade soon explodes, killing both the resurrected version of Owen and the agent along with him. Carter full-on wraps his arms around me, breaking me out of my mindless stare at all the chaos that was going on, attempting to drag me away. I noticed my gun was no longer even pointed at the ground grabber, as he and 16A kept up their fight and moved out of the path of where my barrel was pointed. "Stop! Garrett, stop! Don't do it, don't!" Carter orders, his grip tightening around my waist. I throw my left elbow back into his chest, causing him to groan as I walk forward and aim my gun back at the ground grabber, who was currently holding 16A up against a tree with one hand wrapped around his throat. 16A struggled and kicked to get out, attempting to slash and lacerate him with his claws, but to no avail.
"You are nothing,"
the ground grabber growls with a cocky smile filled with teeth, following up his sentence by delivering a violent left hook to 16A's jaw with his monumental-sized fist. A bit of blood falls upon his knuckles as a result, dark blue in color, the same tint as 16A's skin.
"Nothing but another fool than the long line of beings who have challenged me and failed. My children will kill your armed friends, but fortunately for you, you'll be long dead before they finish."
The ground grabber is quickly cut off, suddenly dropping 16A onto the ground with a loud cracking thud, as he had smashed through a branch on his way down. He looks over at me, the barrel of my gun smoking and me standing there gritting my teeth, instantly regretting my decision. He puts his hand over his hairy upper left thigh where the bullet had penetrated, his signature black ooze of blood leaking, accompanied by his pained growls. I attempted to take a second shot, only for the gun to tragically click. No ammo left.
"No, no!"
Carter whines, backing up like a puppy whose owner had just come home and seen damaged furniture. I do the same, only to hear the sudden and swift sound of Carter turning and hightailing it out of there. I didn't blame him. If I was gonna die, he didn't want to go down with me. But my mind had been so cluttered with the thought of revenge that I forgot the true danger and threat of what was in front of me. In all honesty, I had tried to aim for his head, but my lack of both experience and upper body strength had sealed my now incoming fate. The grabber makes a fist, raising it high in the air as I attempted to back up, only to trip and fall like the clumsy, desperate, and young idiot that I was. With my butt on the ground, I could only watch as he got ready to turn me into nothing but a pile of meat.
"Now you will join your father, you irritating little nuisance,"
he snarls. And then it starts to come down. I close my eyes, preparing for the only nanoseconds of pain before I was wiped from the face of the earth. But it never came. Instead, I reopened my eyes only to see 16A himself standing right in front of me, his left claw holding up the ground grabber's right fist.
"Go before you die."
16A snarls without looking back, his battered and bruised body not holding him back from continuing the fight. I immediately crawl in reverse, twigs and branches poking my hands while also tearing apart the cape of my costume. 16A shoves back against the ground grabber, lunging forward and slashing him 3 times in the face with his claws. Blood gets drawn and the grabber goes blind in one eye, as it had been completely scratched out, cursing 16A for what he had just done. The ground grabber reaches up and wraps his large hands around 16A's head, attempting to squeeze with enough force to crush his skull, only for a 16A to counter his attack by throwing a punch hard enough to somewhat bury the ground grabber's head into the very dirt it was previously resting on. After this fails to get him out of the tight grip, he throws another powerful blow and then another, until I could visibly see his opponent's blood on his knuckles and trickling down his claws. But the ground grabber had enough, violently throwing his neck forward and headbutting 16A, sending him several feet both into the air and flying backwards. I roll over to the side, saving myself from being crushed by the weight of this massive creature. Despite how thin he was, I knew he still had to be at least 2.5 times my mass due to his monstrous height. 16A quickly recovers, turning and leaping onto a tree to begin running up it, presumably to perform a similar attack from above like he had earlier. But instead, he was caught by the ground grabber, who bashed him with the full weight of his much heavier body, and then picked him up over his head before slamming him onto the ground right at his feet. Before his 16A could maneuver out of the way or get back up, the ground grabber stomped his left foot onto his chest, sending him an inch or two into the dirt as payback for the blows 16A had delivered upon him earlier. I could hear an uncomfortable cracking in 16A's chest as the foot made contact. Even 16A snarled and bared his teeth, trying to hide how much agony it had truly caused him. 16A pierces his claws into the flesh of the ground grabber's ankle, which works against him only slightly. Sure, the ground grabber definitely reacts the way you would expect, lifting his foot and howling, but only for a brief moment before slamming it right back down, making 16A desperately reach for something to grab to strike him with. There the both of them were, battered, bloody, and heavily bruised, but the display was clear. The creature who was on my side all along, the one who had set out to protect me, had lost the fight.
After your death, the rest of this town will follow suit, and soon after this planet. Goodbye, Blue One, you too weren't strong enough.
The ground grabber raises his foot high above 16A's head, presumably getting ready to smash his skull. It looked like the end for him, that this would be it, and I would be next. I got up and turned around to run, knowing that as soon as he had finished off 16A, it would be my turn to meet a grisly fate. Except I wouldn't have a fighting chance without any significant weapon, and even then I had no idea what I would actually do. I only knew how to turn off the safety and pull the triggers. But just as I thought all hope was lost, just as I wait to hear the sound of 16A's skull being smashed into the dirt, a final short burst of gunfire crackles through the air, along with a loud, frustrated, and triumphant battle cry, which was then soon followed by a ground-shaking thud. I turned to see what had just taken place, not wanting to get my hopes up yet, still being optimistic as to what would appear as a result of those sounds. But nothing could have left me more relieved than what I had laid my eyes upon. 16A was still alive, albeit with still significant bruises and wounds, but for the most part he seemed fine. He was able to slowly rise off the ground, granted that he struggled here and there as he did so. To his right was the ground grabber, who was now a corpse, his head a pile of brown and black mush from taking so many powerful gunshots to it. I felt my stomach churn as 16A bent over and began to quite literally feast on the ground grabber, ripping and tearing with his razor-sharp teeth and claws, slicing off chunks of meat before inserting them into his mouth as he crunched and chewed loudly, not a care in the world about who saw him doing so. Or at least, that's what it looked like. The ground grabber's brains were definitely spilled, his oddly discolored and strangely shaped brain that is, resembling more of an oversized piece of charcoal rather than anything close to the human brain structure. But as to who had actually put an end to this wicked life form, well, it was the last remaining agent, the one lucky woman of the 4 who hadn't fallen victim to either the ground grabber or his transformed and rabid killers. She dropped to her knees, letting out a heavy breath as her rifle fell to her side onto the street. 16A had seemed grateful for her action, although it seemed any emotional intimacy with humans appeared somewhat difficult for him. "I did it for the bonus, not you, so don't get all hyper," she said rather harshly. Despite the fact, 16A had barely even said a word. He goes back to chowing down regardless. Everything that had happened, it was all finally over. At least physically anyway. I couldn't imagine all the years of intense therapy it was going to take to unscar my mind from all of this. Regardless, he was dead, and so were his resurrected puppets. But plenty of blood was shed in the process. All 3 of the other agents were dead, 1 woman and 2 men. My friend Aaron was still gone from this earth, but part of me saw it as a good thing. A much more merciful fate than being trapped as a mindless puppet for some other being. The female agent grabs what appears to be a walkie-talkie, pressing a button on the side before speaking into it. "This is Agent Amanda. The threat has been terminated. 3 casualties on my location. I repeat, only both I and subject 16A still remain." A few seconds of silence pass before a somewhat familiar male voice responds. "Sending a chopper your way with the recovery team. Are there any witnesses? Have you terminated them?" Terminated? I repeated to myself. Oh no. Before I can even think about turning around, I hear the agent shout my way. "Stop," she commands, looking down the scope on her rifle after picking it back up, forcing me to put my hands up and stop dead in my tracks that I hadn't even gotten a chance to create. I look at 16A, hoping that he would be able to convince her otherwise, but he only holds his side after standing back up, still a bit of his own blood on his claws. He does make eye contact with me, however, his gaze being one of almost pity. Would he even know what that is? "He should be able to go," he surprisingly speaks up, his bassy voice contrasting with the agent's lighter but firm one. "You don't make the rules, freak," she shouts. She then approaches me after getting back to her feet, still making sure her weapon was trained on me. But she takes one hand off, reaching into her utility belt and pulling out some small vial of a strange white liquid, popping off the cap as she got within reach of me. She pulls it out with her hand while holding the vial, putting the top of it just underneath my nose, forcing me to inhale whatever fumes it was putting out. Fumes that caused me to become dizzy, my eyelids heavy as my muscles turned into glass, as if it was some strange variant of chloroform, which it probably was in all honesty. Nonetheless, I blacked out, only to awaken some unknown amount of hours or days later, strapped to some sort of chair in what looked to be a highly sterilized interrogation room. The walls and ceilings were a pristine white, but it was more than just about them being clean. It felt cold, lifeless, distant, no sort of color or personality present whatsoever, as if someone had sucked all the life out of this building, if there was any to begin with. My eyes still felt heavy as I attempted to get my bearings, wondering where exactly they had taken me. I honestly expected myself to be dead, seeing as they said something about terminating witnesses. "Garrett," a voice that I know all too well speaks, interrupting the deafening silence. I turned, shocked to see Carter sitting to my right, tied up in a chair just as I was. The difference being that he now possessed both a black eye and a bottom lip with dried blood on it. "What did they do to you?" I asked with great concern, still somewhat bitter about how he had abandoned me. I still didn't entirely blame him, but it hurt nonetheless. "More of them came," he told me weakly. "They got me before I even made it home. I tried to fight back, but it was stupid. They're trained and grown, and I was on the ground in like 2 seconds. I paused, not knowing what kind of response I could have possibly given that would make this situation any better. Truth be told, I wasn't the best at handling stress. This was just an entirely different ballgame. But I never got the chance to even finish thinking about what it was that I was going to say, as a door had opened and 3 people had entered the room. The one in the middle was a woman of both average height and build, her outfit of choice being a lab coat and a plain shirt underneath. so I assumed her to be a scientist of some sort. She definitely seemed like she had quite a bit of authority just by her confident stare and the way that she walked. She was probably in her late 30s or so. Her long blonde hair was in a ponytail with glasses that sat upon her face. In her hand, she held a binder filled to the brim with all sorts of papers and documents. The man to her right was on the taller side, but not freakishly large by any means. He was clearly older, definitely between 45 to 50. He wore a pristine gray suit, dressed with the grace of a CEO. Not a single wrinkle in it could be found. And finally to the left was the female agent who had captured me in the first place after everything that had gone down. She appeared to be finishing up a conversation with the man in the suit. "We'll have our hands on all witnesses soon, Director. The tech department is combing through both the surface level and deep web for any traces of footage or civilian documentation regarding the mission assets. Anyone that threatens to expose things they shouldn't know about will be taken care of. I can assure you that." "Well, glad to hear it. Now please leave the room. Dr. West and I have things to discuss with these two," he replies with an enthusiastic frown. The agent obeys, turning around and pulling the handle to the same door the three of them had entered in through. A silence befalling the room until it once again closes and she exits. "Hello, boys," Dr. West greets coldly, like a teacher talking to a student he despised. "If you let us go, we won't tell the cops or anything, we promise," Carter spats. The director and Dr. West have next to no reaction to Carter's words. Instead, the director steps forward, confidence in his eyes.
"It wouldn't matter if you did. I mean, you two of all people should know that. Do you know why?" "Because you have agents in the police force," I reply, attempting to display confidence of my own. "Oh no, that's only a small part. You see, the police answer to us. Calling or telling them will be of no use to you. We are kind of like the police, except we enforce the laws of what should and shouldn't be here on this planet." Dr. West goes on, opening up her binder and staring into it as she monologues. "You boys saw things you weren't supposed to. Talk to people you weren't supposed to. Normally, we would just kill you and be done with it. Witnesses make things messy for us, and our job's already hard enough that we hunt down the beings and entities that should have never existed in the first place," the director adds. "You don't do it because you care about humanity. You do it for profit, I bet," I erupt. "My dad is dead because you guys suck at your jobs." "Your dad is dead because he made a foolish mistake. I hope you'll be smarter," Dr. West cuts in. No regret in the callousness of what she had just announced. I feel my blood boil as she says it, every burning nerve in my body telling me to strangle her right there and then if I physically could. But there I sat, powerless to react in any other way than yelling and kicking. "You see, we would like to offer you boys to join us. Clearly, your curiosity and determination to stick your noses where they don't belong could be useful if conditioned and trained properly. However, the alternative is I call one of my agents in here to come put a bullet in each of your heads," announces the director with a stern, unforgiving tone. "Work for you. First off, we're only 13, and second, why would we want to do that? So we can be sent in to kill these things that will tear us apart like those other agents." I grill rather forcefully. "You don't," Dr. West replies, "but it's your only option. You will be paid and given benefits, and we won't send you out on any missions until you're at least 18. Can't have two emotional teenage boys out there anyway. But just know you will never have contact with the outside world, or your families again." "No, our friend got turned into one of those things and died because of your guys," Carter bellows. "Is that your final answer?" Dr. West inquires. Carter then suddenly closes his mouth, realizing the gravity of the situation and choosing his next words carefully. But both the director and Dr. West shoot each other a glance of mutual annoyance at our indecision and inaction, coming to the conclusion that it was best to leave the two of us alone for the time being. "Oh, come on, Ted," West nags. "Let them think about it. If they don't have an answer by the time we come back,
Well, they know what'll happen. Ted, the director, whatever his name was, nods in agreement, although still looking painfully annoyed himself as well.
I'll give you boys some time to really consider what kind of decision you're making here. Hopefully you choose correctly. If not, then say farewell to each other before your termination. If it's a yes, however, well then I guess I'll have to get you guys started on your training and formally welcome you.
A welcome that wouldn't be warm at all, I thought to myself. Welcome us to what? What is this all truly? Carter asks in a rather rhetorical manner, but Ted still answers him regardless.
Welcome to the agency.